Your brain sees before your eyes. Have you ever looked directly at something and still somehow failed to see it? Not because your eyes were closed. Not because the room was dark. Your eyes were doing their job perfectly. Light entered them, shapes hit your retina, information traveled into your brain. And yet, for a moment, the thing was almost invisible. That sounds strange because we grow up believing vision works like a camera. Your eyes capture the world, and your brain simply watches the recording. But that is not really what happens. Your brain is not sitting there waiting for reality to arrive. It is constantly guessing what reality is going to look like before the information even fully reaches your conscious awareness. And once you understand that, ordinary vision starts to feel a little unsettling. Imagine walking into your kitchen late at night. You are half asleep, the lights are off, and you notice something dark standing near the counter. For a split second, your brain might turn that shape into a person. Your heart jumps. Then you turn on the light. It is a jacket hanging from a chair. Nothing about the jacket changed. The object was there the entire time. What changed was your interpretation of the information coming through your eyes. Your brain saw a possibility before it had enough evidence to confirm what was actually there. This is one reason your perception can feel completely real while still being wrong. Your brain is constantly combining incoming sensory information with everything it already knows. Your memories, expectations, fears, habits, and even the context around you can influence what you experience. Think about reading a sentence with a missing letter. You can often understand the word immediately, even before consciously noticing that something is missing. Your brain fills in the gap because it has seen that pattern thousands of times. You are not experiencing every tiny piece of information independently. Your brain is completing the picture. And this is not some rare trick your brain performs when you are tired. It is happening constantly. There is a reason for that. The world sends your brain an enormous amount of sensory information every second. If your brain had to consciously process every edge, every shadow, every movement, every texture, and every tiny change in brightness before deciding what something was, you would be overwhelmed almost instantly. So your brain takes shortcuts. It makes predictions. Then it compares those predictions with the information arriving through your senses. When the prediction is close enough, you experience a stable world. When the prediction is wrong, you get that strange moment of surprise when your brain suddenly realizes, wait, that is not what I thought I was seeing. This is why context has such a powerful effect on perception. Put the same facial expression on two different people, and you might interpret it differently depending on what you already believe about them. Walk into a room expecting someone to be angry with you, and a completely neutral expression can suddenly look hostile. Expect to find your phone on the table, and your brain may scan the familiar shape of the table, while somehow ignoring the phone sitting right in front of you. You have probably experienced this without realizing what was happening. You search for your keys. You look directly at them. You do not see them. Then suddenly they appear. The keys did not become visible. Your brain finally allowed the information to become meaningful. This is where things get even more interesting. Your expectations can influence what you notice, but they can also influence how your brain interprets ambiguous information. When the sensory evidence is unclear, your brain leans more heavily on its predictions. That means two people can be standing in the same room, looking at the same event, and walk away with genuinely different experiences of what happened. Not necessarily because one person is lying. Not necessarily because one person has a bad memory. Their brains may have been constructing different versions of the event while it was happening. And there is something deeply human about that. We like to imagine that we are looking at reality exactly as it is. We trust our eyes because seeing feels direct. If you can see something with your own eyes, it feels like the strongest possible evidence. But your eyes are not giving you a finished world. They are giving your brain signals. Your brain is the one turning those signals into objects, faces, distance, movement, meaning, and importance. That is why attention matters so much. You can be surrounded by information and consciously experience only a tiny fraction of it. Your brain has to decide what deserves priority. A sudden movement gets your attention. Your name cuts through a crowded conversation. A familiar face can stand out in a sea of strangers. Your brain is constantly asking a silent question. What matters here? And the answer is shaped by what you expect, what you fear, what you care about, and what you have learned before. So when you look around your room right now, it may feel like you are simply observing the world. But something more complicated is happening. Your brain is making its best prediction about the world and continuously checking that prediction against the signals coming from your eyes. Most of the time, the process is so fast and so accurate that you never notice it. You simply experience reality, and that may be the most fascinating part. The world you see feels like something you discovered, but in many ways, it is something your brain is actively constructing moment by moment from incomplete information, past experience, and constant prediction. You are not just seeing the world. Your brain is deciding what the world looks like. The world your brain fills in right now. There is a part of your vision that you are completely unaware of. It is not hidden behind a wall. It is not too far away to see. It is literally missing from your visual field. And yet you experience the world as if nothing is missing at all. Take your blind spot. Every human eye has one. It exists because the optic nerve has to leave the back of your eye, creating a small area where there are no light-detecting cells. Technically, there is a tiny hole in what your eye can see. But when you look around, you do not see a black dot sitting somewhere in your vision. You see a complete world. Your brain fills the gap, and it does this so smoothly that you never notice the repair happening. That is the strange thing about perception. Your brain is constantly receiving incomplete information, but it rarely lets you experience that incompleteness. Instead, it makes an educated guess about what should be there and gives you the finished version. Imagine looking at a brick wall. You might think you are seeing every brick clearly, every edge, every line, every tiny detail. But your brain is not processing every single point with equal attention. It is identifying the overall pattern, predicting what belongs where, and filling in details that do not need your conscious attention. This is incredibly useful. Without it, the world would feel chaotic. Think about walking down a familiar street. You are not consciously analyzing every tree, every window, every crack in the pavement, every passing car, and every face. Your brain recognizes the environment almost instantly because it already has a model of what that environment usually looks like. That model helps you move through the world without constantly starting from zero. But there is a catch. The same system that makes perception fast can also make perception wrong. Because when your brain does not have enough information, it does not simply stop, it guesses. and sometimes it guesses with enormous confidence. Imagine you are walking through your house at night and see a shape on the floor. From a distance, it looks like an animal. Your brain immediately reacts to that possibility. You might tense your body, slow down, and stare at it. Then you turn on the light. It is a pair of shoes. The shoes did not change. Your brain changed its interpretation of the information. This is why context is so powerful. Your brain does not look at isolated pieces of information and then build reality from nothing. It uses everything available to it. Where you are, what you were expecting, what happened a few seconds ago, what you already know, what you are paying attention to, even what you are afraid might happen. All of these things can influence what your brain decides you are experiencing. You can see this clearly in visual illusions. A simple shape can look different depending on the shapes surrounding it. Two identical colors can appear different when placed against different backgrounds. A stationary image can seem to move. A face can appear in a random pattern because your brain is extremely sensitive to familiar structures. Your brain is not malfunctioning when this happens. It is doing exactly what it evolved to do. It is trying to extract meaning from limited information as quickly as possible. Think about how often you recognize something before you can explain why you recognize it. You see a person across a crowded room. You instantly know who they are, but you did not consciously measure their face. You did not calculate the distance between their eyes or analyze every individual feature. Your brain matched the incoming pattern against memories stored from previous experiences. It recognized the person before you could explain the recognition. The same thing happens with voices, places, objects, and even situations. That is why a room can feel familiar before you remember why. Your brain may detect a pattern that your conscious mind has not identified yet, and this becomes even more important when information is ambiguous. Suppose you hear a strange sound outside your bedroom at night. During the day, you might interpret it as a tree branch moving against a window. At night, when you are alone, your brain might interpret the exact same sound as footsteps. The sound did not necessarily change. Your prediction changed. Your emotional state changed. And because the sensory information was unclear, your brain had more room to rely on its expectations. This is one reason fear can make ordinary things feel threatening. Your brain is not waiting for perfect evidence before deciding what something might be. In situations where being wrong could be dangerous, it can be useful to assume the worst for a moment. If that shadow is a harmless bush, you lose nothing by being cautious. But if that shadow really is a threat, reacting quickly could matter. So your brain would rather sometimes create a false alarm than completely miss something important. The problem is that modern life gives us plenty of situations where those ancient prediction systems can mislead us. A short message from someone can feel angry because you expected them to be upset. A neutral expression can look judgmental when you already feel insecure. A crowded room can feel hostile when you are anxious. A mistake can feel like proof that you are failing when your brain has already started expecting failure. In each case, your mind is not simply recording what is happening. It is interpreting what is happening. And that distinction changes everything. Because once you understand that your brain fills in missing information, you start to realize that perception is not just about what enters through your eyes. It is also about what your brain expects to find there. The world feels solid and complete because your brain is constantly repairing the gaps, smoothing over the uncertainty, and turning fragments into a coherent experience. You rarely notice the construction because the construction is the point. Your brain wants you to experience a world that makes sense, even when the evidence is incomplete, even when the picture has holes, even when the reality in front of you is far messier than the version your mind creates. You do not walk around experiencing raw information. You experience the version your brain believes is most likely to be there. And most of the time, that invisible act of filling in is so convincing that you mistake the brain's best guess for reality itself. Your brain deletes reality. There are things happening directly in front of you right now that your brain has decided you do not need to experience. Not because your eyes cannot detect them, not because they are too small. Your brain simply does not consider them important enough to keep. That sounds almost impossible because we tend to imagine perception as a recording. Whatever happens in front of you should be captured, stored, and available whenever you want to remember it. But your brain does something very different. It filters. It suppresses. It throws away enormous amounts of information so that you can function without being completely overwhelmed. And the strangest part is that you usually never notice what has been deleted. Think about your own face. You see your nose every single day. It is right in the middle of your visual field. You should be constantly aware of it. But you are not. Right now, you can probably notice it if you deliberately focus on it. Suddenly your nose becomes obvious. You can see its shape, the edges, maybe even the tiny changes in light across its surface. But a few seconds ago, you were probably not experiencing it at all. Your brain was filtering it out. It has learned that your nose is stable, predictable, and usually irrelevant. So instead of spending precious attention processing it, your brain pushes it into the background. And this is happening everywhere. You do not consciously hear the constant hum of a fan after sitting in a room for a while. You stop noticing the feeling of your clothes against your skin. You may forget the pressure of the chair beneath you. You can walk past the same smell dozens of times and eventually stop noticing it. The information is still reaching your senses. Your brain is simply deciding that it no longer deserves your attention. This process is one of the reasons you can concentrate at all. Imagine if your brain treated every sound around you as equally important. The air conditioner would demand attention. The refrigerator would demand attention. The traffic outside would demand attention. Your clothes touching your arms would demand attention. The pressure under your feet would demand attention. The feeling of your tongue inside your mouth would demand attention. Every tiny change in light would compete for your awareness. You would barely be able to think. So your brain has to make brutal decisions. This matters. That does not. Pay attention to this. Ignore that, and it makes those decisions constantly. The problem is that your brain does not know objective importance. It knows predictive importance. That distinction can completely change what you experience. If you are sitting in a quiet room and suddenly hear your name, your attention snaps toward it. But if someone is talking about a subject you have been thinking about all day, you might suddenly notice related words in a crowded conversation. If you are shopping for a particular car, you may suddenly start seeing that exact model everywhere. It can feel like everyone suddenly bought the same car. They did not. Your brain simply changed what it was looking for. The world did not necessarily become different. Your filter did. And this is where the idea of your brain deleting reality becomes much more powerful. Because attention does not only determine what you notice, it also determines what you miss. There is a famous psychological experiment that demonstrates this beautifully. People are asked to watch a video and count how many times a ball is passed between players. While they are intensely focused on counting, something completely unexpected can appear in the middle of the scene. Many people fail to notice it. The object was visible. Their eyes received the information, but their attention was occupied. The brain decided that the unexpected event did not fit the task it was trying to accomplish, so the experience of seeing it never fully reached conscious awareness. This is called inattentional blindness, and it happens in everyday life far more than you realize. You can walk through a familiar building and fail to notice a new sign. You can search for your phone while staring directly at it. You can listen to someone speaking and realize afterward that you have no idea what they actually said. You can drive a familiar route and suddenly realize you barely remember the last few minutes. Your brain was not necessarily asleep. It was running a prediction. The environment was familiar. The route was familiar. The actions were familiar. So your brain could handle much of the process automatically. Conscious attention was reserved for something else. That is incredibly efficient. But it also means you can be surrounded by reality and still experience only a carefully selected version of it. And there is something uncomfortable about that. We often assume that if something important happened, we would have noticed. But that is not guaranteed. Something can happen directly in front of you, while your brain is focused somewhere else. Something can be visible without becoming consciously experienced. Something can be heard without being remembered. Something can be present without becoming part of the reality you feel you witnessed. Your brain is constantly protecting you from information overload by removing what it considers unnecessary. And most of the time, that is exactly what you want. You do not want to consciously process every sound in a busy street. You do not want to notice every face in a crowd. You do not want to feel every movement of your clothing against your body. You need a simplified version of reality to think, act, and make decisions. But that simplified version feels complete. That is the illusion. You do not experience the world as filtered. You experience the filtered version as the world. Your brain quietly removes details, suppresses repetition, prioritizes certain signals, and ignores others. Then it hands you the final result and makes it feel obvious. This is why attention is so powerful. Where you place it determines which pieces of reality become part of your conscious experience. And what your brain filters out can be just as important as what it lets you see. Because sometimes reality does not disappear. Your brain simply stops showing it to you. Why you miss what's right there? You can stare directly at something and still not see it. That sounds like a contradiction, but you have probably experienced it more times than you realize. You search for your phone, your keys, your glasses, maybe even something that is sitting in the exact place you expected it to be. You look at the table 3 times. Nothing. You get frustrated. Then someone points at it and suddenly you see it. And the weird part is that your eyes were already looking at it. So what happened? Your eyes did not fail. Your brain did. Or more accurately, your brain was solving a different problem. We like to think seeing means looking. If your eyes are pointed at an object, you should be consciously experiencing that object. But vision does not work that way. Your eyes collect an enormous amount of information, while your attention decides what information actually gets promoted into your conscious experience. That means there is a huge difference between something being visible and something being noticed. And your brain is constantly making that decision without asking you. Imagine you are late for work and desperately looking for your car keys. You are already stressed. You know you left them somewhere near the entrance, so your brain starts searching for a familiar shape that matches the idea of keys. But sitting beside the keys is a small black object you do not expect to see. Your eyes receive information from both objects. Your brain gives priority to the information that matches your search. That is why searching can sometimes make you worse at finding something. You are not simply looking at the environment. You are looking for a prediction. And when reality does not match that prediction, your brain can effectively say, "Nothing useful here, keep moving." This is called inattentional blindness. It happens when your attention is so focused on one task that you fail to notice something else that is clearly visible. One of the most famous demonstrations involved people watching a video and counting how many times players passed a ball. While they were concentrating on the counting task, an unexpected person appeared in the middle of the scene. A surprising number of people did not notice. The person was not hidden. There was no trick involving darkness. The object was right there, but the brain was focused on counting passes, so the unexpected information did not receive enough attention to become part of conscious awareness. That tells us something important about your everyday life. You do not simply miss things because you are careless. Sometimes you miss them because your brain has already decided what matters. Think about walking through a crowded airport. Hundreds of people are visible. Your eyes are receiving information from countless faces, bodies, bags, signs, screens, and movements. But if you are looking for one specific person, your brain starts filtering the environment around that goal. A familiar face suddenly jumps out. Everything else becomes background. Now imagine that person changes their hairstyle, wears a hat, or stands somewhere you did not expect. Suddenly finding them becomes much harder. The person is still there. The problem is that your internal template is no longer matching reality as easily. This is why expectations can be so powerful. Your brain is not scanning reality with a completely open mind. It is constantly using what it already knows to predict what should be there. And when the prediction works, life feels effortless. You recognize your bedroom without analyzing every object. You understand a sentence even when some letters are unclear. You know what a familiar sound probably means before you consciously identify it. You can walk through your home without thinking about every step. Prediction saves energy, but prediction also creates blind spots. If you strongly expect to find something in one location, you can become strangely resistant to seeing it somewhere else. If you expect a person to be angry, you may notice every tiny sign that supports that belief while ignoring evidence that they are actually fine. If you believe someone dislikes you, a delayed reply can feel meaningful. You might think, "There it is. They are ignoring me." But if you already believed they liked you, the exact same delayed reply might barely register. The event is identical. Your attention is not, and that is where this becomes more than a story about missing your keys. Your brain can miss information because information conflicts with what you expected. That means two people can experience the same conversation and come away with completely different impressions. One person notices the smile, the other notices the pause. One remembers the friendly comment, the other remembers the one awkward moment. Neither person necessarily invented the event. Their brains simply selected different pieces of it. Your attention is like a spotlight, but it is not a perfect spotlight. It does not illuminate everything equally. It moves toward what your brain considers relevant, and what feels relevant is influenced by your goals, emotions, memories, habits, and expectations. This is why anxiety can make the world feel full of threats. When your brain is expecting danger, it becomes extremely sensitive to signals that might confirm that danger. A strange sound becomes important. A person's expression becomes important. A small physical sensation becomes important. Your brain starts scanning for evidence. Meanwhile, harmless information can fade into the background. The same mechanism can work in the opposite direction. When you are excited about something, you suddenly notice it everywhere. You decide you want a particular type of car, and suddenly that car seems to be on every road. You start thinking about a certain word, and suddenly you hear it in conversations. You become interested in a subject, and the world seems to contain more of it. It did not necessarily appear more often. You became better at noticing it. Your brain changed the filter, and that filter is running all the time. This means there may be important things around you that you are currently missing, not because they are invisible, but because your brain has no reason to prioritize them. A tiny change in your environment, a detail in someone's expression, a possibility you have not considered, a solution sitting in front of you. Sometimes the information you need is not absent. It is simply outside the spotlight of your attention. That is why being more observant is not just about looking harder. Sometimes you have to look differently. Change the question you are asking. Challenge the expectation you brought into the situation. Stop searching for the thing you think should be there, and give your brain a chance to notice what actually is. Because your eyes can be wide open while your attention is somewhere else. And when attention leaves something behind, reality does not disappear. You simply stop experiencing that part of it. Your brain guesses your surroundings. Walk into a room you have never seen before, and your brain starts making decisions almost immediately. Is that doorway close? Is the floor level? Is that object safe to walk around? Is that person coming toward me? Where should I look? You do not consciously ask yourself these questions. Your brain answers them before you even realize you needed an answer. And here is the strange part. Your brain does not have perfect information. It never does. Your eyes give it patterns of light. Your ears give it vibrations. Your body gives it signals about balance, movement, pressure, and position. From all of that incomplete information, your brain has to build a working version of the environment around you. So it guesses, constantly. Most of the time, those guesses are so good that you experience them as facts. You look at a chair and you do not think, this is probably a chair based on the evidence available to me. You just see a chair. You walk toward a doorway, and you do not calculate its distance using a complicated equation. You simply know where it is. That feeling of certainty is created by your brain's ability to make extremely fast predictions. Think about walking down a staircase. Your brain has to estimate the height of each step, the distance between your body and the ground, how much your leg needs to move, and how your balance needs to adjust. You are not consciously calculating any of this. Your brain has learned the patterns through experience. That is why you can walk down familiar stairs while thinking about something completely different. Your brain is predicting what comes next. Then it checks those predictions against incoming information. If everything matches, you keep moving. But if something is different, your brain reacts. Imagine you are walking down a staircase in your house, and suddenly one step is slightly higher than the others. Your foot expects the usual distance. It moves according to that prediction. Then reality does not match. You stumble. For a tiny moment, your brain has to update its model. The important thing is that the prediction came first. This is happening constantly in your surroundings. Your brain is not waiting for every detail to arrive before understanding the world. That would be far too slow. Instead, it uses previous experience to predict what it expects to encounter. This idea is closely connected to predictive processing, a way of understanding perception in which the brain continuously generates predictions about incoming sensory information and updates those predictions when there is a mismatch. In simple terms, your brain is constantly saying, "This is probably what I am about to experience." Then your senses respond with information. Sometimes the prediction is correct. Sometimes it is wrong. When it is wrong, your brain adjusts. That sounds simple, but it explains some incredibly strange experiences. Think about walking into your bedroom after being away for a few days. You immediately know where everything is. You know where the bed should be. You know where the door should be. You know roughly where the light switch should be. You are not rebuilding the entire room from scratch. Your brain already has a model. Now imagine someone moves your chair into an unusual position. You walk into the room expecting the familiar layout. Your brain predicts empty space. Instead, your leg hits the chair. That sudden jolt is more than physical contact. It is a prediction error. Your brain expected one thing and received another. And that mismatch grabs your attention instantly. This is why unexpected things feel so powerful. Your brain is extremely sensitive to surprises because surprises contain information. If something happens exactly as expected, there is not much to learn. But when reality violates your prediction, your brain has a reason to pay attention. That is one reason novelty feels exciting. It is also one reason uncertainty can feel uncomfortable. Your brain likes environments it can predict. Familiar places require less mental effort. Familiar people are easier to interpret. Familiar routines feel comfortable because your brain already knows what is likely to happen next. But put yourself in a completely unfamiliar environment and suddenly you become much more alert. A new city, a strange hotel room, a crowded event where you know nobody. Your brain starts gathering more information because its predictions are less reliable. Every sound matters more. Every movement catches your attention. You notice where the exits are. You notice who is around you. You become more aware of your surroundings. Your brain is essentially trying to build a new model, and this also explains why your surroundings can sometimes feel different depending on your emotional state. When you are relaxed, a dark street might simply look quiet. When you are frightened, the same street can feel threatening. The physical environment may be almost identical, but your brain's predictions have changed. If your brain expects danger, ambiguous information becomes more suspicious. A distant shape might look like a person. A harmless sound might seem important. A shadow might suddenly look like movement. Your senses are giving you incomplete information, so your brain uses context to decide what that information probably means. And this is not necessarily a flaw. It is a survival system. If you hear a branch snap in a forest, your brain does not need to wait for perfect evidence before becoming alert. It can make a quick prediction. Something might be there. Check it. Better to investigate a harmless sound than ignore a real threat. But that same system can create false alarms. Your brain would rather sometimes predict danger where there is none than completely fail to predict danger when it matters. This is why your emotional state can change the way a place feels without the place physically changing. Your brain is not only interpreting your surroundings, it is constantly estimating what those surroundings mean for you. Safe, unsafe, familiar, unfamiliar, important, irrelevant, approaching, moving away. Your conscious mind receives the final result and experiences it as the world around you. But underneath that experience, your brain is doing something much more complicated. It is taking fragments of sensory information and combining them with everything it has learned before. It is filling gaps. It is making predictions. It is correcting mistakes. It is updating its model. And because the process happens incredibly quickly, you never experience the guessing itself. You experience certainty. You look around and feel like you are simply seeing what is there. But your brain is doing something closer to solving a puzzle in real time. Every object, every sound, every movement is another piece of evidence. Your brain takes those pieces and asks what explanation makes the most sense. Most of the time, it gets the answer right. And when it does, the world feels obvious, solid, stable, real. But underneath that effortless experience is a prediction engine constantly guessing what should be there, checking what actually is there, and quietly rewriting your version of reality whenever the two do not match. The color your brain invented, look at something red, a red apple, a red shirt, a red traffic light. It feels like the redness is simply sitting there inside the object, as if the object itself is carrying a little piece of red and your eyes are just picking it up. But that is not what is happening. There is no tiny packet of red inside an apple. There is no physical substance called red sitting on the surface of a traffic light. What exists outside your body is light. Your brain turns that light into color. And once you realize that, color starts to look less like a property of the world and more like something your brain creates to help you understand the world. Light reaches your eyes in different wavelengths. Your eyes contain specialized cells that respond to different ranges of those wavelengths. The information is sent through the visual system, and your brain compares those signals with surrounding information, brightness, context, and previous experience. Then you experience color. You do not experience wavelengths. You experience red. You do not experience a mathematical measurement of light. You experience blue, green, yellow, orange, purple. Your brain takes physical information and turns it into a sensation. And it gets even stranger when you realize that the same physical light can look different depending on what surrounds it. Put a gray object against a dark background, and it can appear lighter. Put that same gray object against a bright background, and it can appear darker. The physical object has not changed. The light reaching your eyes may be very similar, but your perception changes because your brain is interpreting the object in relation to everything around it. This is why color is not as simple as saying, "I see what is there." Your brain is constantly asking, what color is this object likely to be under these lighting conditions? That question matters because the world is full of changing light. A white shirt can look white under sunlight, yellowish under a warm lamp, and bluish under certain artificial lighting. If your brain treated every change in illumination as a complete change in the object's color, the world would look unstable. So your visual system tries to compensate. It estimates the lighting. It considers the surroundings. It uses context. Then it gives you a stable interpretation. That is called color constancy, and it is incredibly useful. Imagine if the color of every familiar object changed dramatically every time you walked from sunlight into a room. A banana could suddenly look gray. A white wall could suddenly look orange. Your clothes could appear completely different depending on which light source was nearby. Instead, your brain tries to preserve what it believes the object's actual color should be. This is another example of your brain constructing a useful version of reality, rather than simply copying the information coming into your eyes. And you can catch your brain doing this with optical illusions. You may have seen images where two identical shades appear to be different colors because they are surrounded by different colors. Your first reaction is usually, those two squares are clearly different. Then you discover they are physically identical. And that moment feels almost offensive, because your brain was completely convinced. You were not pretending to see the difference. You genuinely experienced it. That is the important part. Perception does not feel like an interpretation. It feels like direct access to reality. When you see red, you do not experience your brain making a decision about red. You simply experience red. That is why visual illusions are so powerful. They reveal the machinery that normally stays hidden. Your brain is constantly making judgments about brightness, color, distance, shape, and contrast. Most of those judgments are so useful that you never question them. But when an illusion tricks the system, you suddenly get a glimpse of what has been happening all along. Your brain has been interpreting, and color is one of the clearest examples. Think about a sunset. You see a glowing orange sky and maybe deep reds, pinks, and purples near the horizon. It feels like the sky itself is painted with those colors. But what you are experiencing is your brain interpreting the light that reaches your eyes under a particular set of physical conditions. Change the light. Change the surrounding environment. Change the way the brain receives the signals, and your experience of the color can change. Even animals do not necessarily experience the same visual world you do. Some animals can detect wavelengths of light that humans cannot see. Others have visual systems that are tuned to different ranges of information. That means there is no single universal visual experience that every creature receives from the same environment. A flower may look one way to you and completely different to another animal. The physical flower exists. The reflected light exists. But the experienced color depends on the nervous system interpreting that information. This is why saying the brain invents color does not mean color is fake. The world is still physically real. Light is real. Wavelengths are real. Objects reflect and absorb light according to physical properties. But the experience of color is your brain's way of translating those physical signals into something useful. It is like your brain takes an abstract physical process and gives it a language your conscious mind can understand. Instead of giving you numbers and wavelengths, it gives you red. Instead of giving you a spectrum of electromagnetic energy, it gives you blue. It transforms physics into experience, and that transformation is happening every second you are awake. So the next time you look at something bright red and feel like the redness is simply sitting there in the object, remember what is actually happening. Light enters your eyes. Your visual system analyzes patterns in that light. Your brain compares those signals with context and expectations. Then your mind produces the experience you call color. The red was not waiting inside the apple for you to discover it. Your brain created the experience of read from information about the world. And that means every time you look around and see a world filled with color, you are not just observing what reality looks like. You are experiencing the version of reality your brain has constructed from light. Your brain can move time. Have you ever had a moment that felt like it lasted forever, even though only a few seconds passed? Maybe you were in a car and suddenly had to slam on the brakes. Maybe something fell unexpectedly and you watched it hit the ground. Maybe you received terrible news and everything around you seemed to slow down. Then later, when you think about the moment, it feels strangely long. But the clock never changed. The seconds did not actually stretch. Your brain changed your experience of time. And this happens in the opposite direction too. You can spend an entire afternoon doing something enjoyable. Look at the clock and suddenly realize 3 hours have disappeared. Nothing about physical time changed. Your experience of it did. That is because your brain does not have a simple internal stopwatch that measures every second equally. Instead, your experience of time is constructed from attention, memory, emotion, novelty, and the amount of information your brain is processing. Think about the last time you were waiting for something you really wanted. Maybe you were waiting for someone to reply. You check your phone. Only 2 minutes have passed. You check again. Another 30 seconds. It feels ridiculous. When you are watching every second, time seems painfully slow. Now compare that with being completely absorbed in something you enjoy. You start watching a movie, playing a game, talking with someone, or working on something that has your full attention. You look up. Hours are gone. Where did the time go? Your brain was not measuring every passing second because your attention was busy processing something else. This is one reason boredom can make time feel slow. When there is very little happening, your attention turns inward toward the passing of time itself. You become aware of every small interval. You notice the waiting. You notice the clock. You notice how long it feels. But when something is exciting or absorbing, your attention moves away from the passage of time. The strange part is that emotion can distort time even more dramatically. When you are frightened, your brain becomes extremely alert. Your attention becomes sharper. You notice more details. A sudden sound. A person's movement. The distance between you and something dangerous. Your brain is collecting information rapidly because the situation might matter for your survival. This can create the feeling that everything is happening in slow motion. People sometimes describe accidents this way. They remember individual details with surprising clarity, almost as if the event unfolded much more slowly than it actually did. But that does not necessarily mean the brain literally sped up its perception like a high-speed camera. Something more complicated may be happening. During intense situations, your brain can become highly focused and encode more information than it normally would. When you remember the event later, that dense memory can make the experience feel longer and more detailed. So your memory of time can change too. And this leads to another strange effect. A new experience can feel longer in memory than a familiar one. Think about your first day in a completely new place. Everything is unfamiliar. The streets are different. The buildings are different. The sounds are different. You are constantly paying attention because your brain cannot rely on old predictions. You collect more details. Now compare that with an ordinary day at home. You wake up. You follow your routine. You travel along a familiar route. You do familiar tasks. You barely notice the details because your brain already knows what to expect. Then the day is over. It feels like it vanished. This is one reason childhood can seem incredibly long when you look back on it. When you are young, so many experiences are new. Your brain is constantly building new models of the world. A single summer can contain an enormous number of unfamiliar experiences. Years later, those memories can make that period feel huge. As an adult, routines can compress your memories because many days contain similar patterns. The days still happened. The clock still moved at the same speed, but your brain did not create the same amount of distinctive information from each day. That changes how long the period feels when you remember it. And there is something deeply strange about that. You can live through the same amount of physical time and experience completely different psychological amounts of time. 10 minutes can feel endless. 10 hours can disappear. A frightening moment can feel stretched. A familiar month can feel like it barely existed. Your brain is not simply telling you what time it is. It is constructing what time feels like, and that construction depends heavily on what you are doing. If your attention is locked onto the passing seconds, time becomes noticeable. If your attention is absorbed in the world, time can almost disappear. This is why waiting rooms feel different from vacations. Why 5 minutes before an important announcement can feel longer than an entire evening with friends. Why the final minutes of an exam can disappear when you are rushing. Why a boring lecture can feel like it has lasted twice as long as it actually has. The clock is objective. Your experience is not. And this becomes even more fascinating when you realize that your brain can create different experiences of the same event depending on when you are thinking about it. While you are living through something, it might feel short. Later, when you look back, it might seem long because your memory contains so many distinctive moments. That means there is no single psychological timeline inside your head. There is the time you experience while something is happening, and there is the time your memory constructs afterward. They do not always agree. So when you say that time flew by, you are not imagining it. And when you say that a few seconds felt like an eternity, you are not imagining that either. The physical clock did exactly what it always does. Your brain simply changed the way those seconds were experienced, remembered, and understood. Time itself did not bend. Your perception did. And sometimes, that is enough to make the same minute feel like a lifetime or disappear before you even realize it was there. Why reality looks stable? Look around you for a moment. The room seems completely stable. The walls are not moving. The floor is not tilting. The objects around you are not constantly changing shape. Your phone looks like the same phone whether you glance at it for half a second or stare at it for a full minute. It feels obvious. The world is stable because the world is stable. But there is a problem with that explanation. The information reaching your brain is constantly changing. Every time your eyes move, the image falling on your retina changes. Every time you move your head, the position of objects shifts. When you walk across a room, the entire visual scene moves across your field of view. And yet the world does not feel like it is shaking, jumping, or transforming every time you move. Your brain is quietly correcting for all of it. In fact, your brain has to do an enormous amount of work to give you the feeling that you are looking at one continuous, stable world. Think about moving your eyes from one side of the room to the other. Your eyes make extremely fast movements called saccades. During these movements, The image on your retina sweeps across a large portion of your visual field. If you experienced every bit of that raw visual movement consciously, the world should appear chaotic every time you looked somewhere else. But it does not. You simply experience the room as still. Your brain suppresses much of the visual information generated by your own eye movements so that the world does not appear to jump around. That is a remarkable trick. Your eyes are moving. The image is changing. But your experience remains stable. And this tells you something important about perception. Your brain is not simply showing you whatever information arrives at your senses. It is actively deciding what kind of experience makes sense. Imagine holding your phone and moving it slightly. The phone moves relative to your eyes, but you do not usually think the phone itself has suddenly changed shape or size. Your brain knows that the movement could have been caused by you moving, so it separates changes in the sensory information that come from your own movement from changes that probably happened in the outside world. This is essential because you are almost never perfectly still. You breathe, you blink, you move your head, you shift your body, your eyes move constantly. If your brain interpreted every sensory change as evidence that the world itself was changing, ordinary life would feel completely unstable. So your brain builds continuity. It takes snapshots and stitches them into a coherent experience. You do not consciously experience separate frames. You experience a continuous world. That continuity is partly an achievement of your nervous system. And there is another reason the world feels so stable. Your brain expects stability. Most objects around you do not randomly transform from one moment to the next. A chair stays a chair. A wall stays a wall. A door does not suddenly become twice as wide. A building does not change shape every time you look away. Because these things are predictable, your brain uses those expectations to interpret new sensory information. This is incredibly useful. If an object suddenly looks slightly different because the lighting changed, your brain does not immediately conclude that the object itself transformed. It considers the context. Maybe you moved. Maybe the light changed. Maybe the viewing angle changed. Maybe a shadow appeared. Your brain searches for the explanation that best fits the situation. And because the brain is so good at doing this, you experience objects as having stable properties, even though the information reaching your eyes is constantly changing. Consider the size of an object. A person walking toward you gets larger on your retina. If you simply experienced retinal size as physical size, you would feel as if the person were literally growing as they approached. But you do not. You understand that the person is getting closer. The person remains the same size. Your brain uses distance and context to keep the experience of the person stable. This is called size constancy. The same basic idea applies to color and shape. A white shirt still looks white under different lighting. A door still looks rectangular when you view it from an angle, even though its image on your retina becomes distorted. A familiar object can look dramatically different from different viewpoints, but your brain still recognizes it as the same object. Reality feels stable because your brain is constantly correcting the raw sensory information to preserve continuity. And sometimes you can actually catch this process failing. When you see something moving extremely quickly, your brain has less time to build a stable interpretation. When lighting changes suddenly, objects can appear briefly strange. When you are extremely tired, perception can feel less reliable. When you enter a completely unfamiliar environment, your brain has fewer predictions to rely on, so you may feel unusually alert. The more predictable the environment, the less conscious effort you need to spend constructing it. That is why familiar places can almost disappear into the background. You know the layout. You know where the objects are. You know what usually happens. Your brain can maintain the model with very little effort. But walk into a completely unfamiliar building and everything demands attention. Where is the exit? Where are the stairs? What is that sound? Where does this hallway lead? Your brain is collecting information because it has not yet built a reliable model of the environment. This is also why sudden changes grab your attention so strongly. A new object appears on your desk. You notice immediately. A familiar painting is moved. You notice. Someone enters a room unexpectedly. You notice. Your brain is constantly comparing what it expects with what it receives. When the difference is small, it can smooth it over. When the difference is large, your attention locks onto it. That is how the brain protects your sense of continuity while still allowing you to detect change. And there is something almost invisible about this process. You never experience your brain stabilizing the world. You just experience a stable world. You do not feel the corrections. You do not see the predictions. You do not notice the calculations. You simply look around and feel like reality is sitting there, solid and unchanged. But underneath that effortless experience, your brain is continuously tracking your movements, interpreting changing sensory signals, predicting what should remain stable, and correcting anything that does not fit. The stability you experience is not proof that your senses are giving you a perfect recording of reality. It is evidence that your brain is incredibly good at turning unstable sensory information into a stable experience. The world keeps changing around you. Your eyes keep moving. Your body keeps moving. The signals keep changing. And somehow your brain turns all of that motion into something that feels completely still. You are not just seeing a stable world. Your brain is constantly building one. Your brain hides the gaps. There are gaps in what you see right now, but you have absolutely no idea where they are. Your vision feels complete. You look across a room, and everything seems connected. Objects have solid edges. Surfaces continue behind things you cannot see. The world feels whole. But your brain is constantly working with missing information. It does not receive a perfect picture of reality. It receives fragments. And instead of showing you those fragments with all their holes and uncertainty, it quietly fills in what is missing. You already have one obvious gap in each eye called the blind spot. It exists because the optic nerve has to pass through the retina, creating a small area without light-detecting cells. There is literally a place in your visual field where your eye cannot detect incoming light. Yet you do not walk around with a black hole in your vision. Your brain fills it. If there is a plain wall behind the blind spot, your brain assumes the wall continues. If there is a pattern, your brain predicts that the pattern continues. If there is an object partly hidden behind another object, your brain assumes the hidden part is probably still there. You experience a complete world because your brain is constantly hiding the gaps. And this is not limited to your blind spot. Think about what happens when you look at a person standing behind a table. You might see their head, shoulders, and arms. The table blocks the rest of their body, but you do not experience a floating head and two disconnected arms. You automatically understand that a body continues behind the table. You are seeing the visible pieces and mentally completing the hidden ones. This happens so quickly that it feels like you are seeing the entire person. But you are not. You are seeing enough information for your brain to construct the rest. This ability is extremely useful because the world is full of objects that partially hide one another. A tree blocks a building. A car blocks a person. A cup blocks part of a table. A curtain blocks part of a window. If your brain could only recognize objects when every part was visible, everyday life would be incredibly difficult. Instead, your brain looks for patterns. It asks what explanation makes the most sense. If you see two legs sticking out from behind a chair, your brain does not assume there are two random legs floating there. It assumes there is a person behind the chair. If you see part of a familiar object, your brain can often identify the whole thing almost instantly. This is one of the reasons you can recognize something even when it is partially hidden. Your brain has learned what objects usually look like. It knows that objects continue behind obstacles. It knows that surfaces usually do not suddenly disappear for no reason. It knows that patterns tend to continue. So when information is missing, it makes a prediction. And most of the time, that prediction is exactly what you need. But here is where things become fascinating. Your brain does not only fill in missing visual information, it also fills in missing information when you listen to people speak. Imagine someone says a sentence in a noisy restaurant. You do not hear every sound clearly. Maybe a glass crashes nearby. Someone laughs. Music is playing. Several conversations overlap, and yet you can often understand what the person is saying. Your brain uses the sounds it can detect, the words that came before them, the topic of the conversation, and the structure of language to reconstruct what was probably said. Sometimes you can even understand a sentence when part of a word is completely masked by noise. Your brain fills the gap. This is possible because language is highly predictable. If someone says, "Please close the," your brain already has expectations about what might come next. Door, window, book. You do not consciously calculate every possibility. Your brain uses the context to narrow them down. This same prediction system operates when you read. If a word is partly covered or a letter is unclear, you can often understand it anyway. Your brain does not need every pixel. It needs enough evidence to make a useful prediction. That is why your experience of reality can feel much more complete than the information your senses actually provide. And there is an important reason your brain does this. Perfect sensory information is impossible. Your eyes have limited resolution. Your ears receive noise. Objects are hidden. Lighting changes. Your body moves. Information arrives at different speeds. If your brain waited for complete evidence before creating an interpretation, you would constantly be stuck in uncertainty. So it takes what it has and makes the best prediction available. This is incredibly efficient. But it also means your perception can sometimes be confidently wrong. If you see a dark shape in the distance, your brain may complete the missing details based on context. If you are walking through a forest at night, a branch can briefly look like an animal. If you are anxious, a harmless sound can become a possible threat. If you are expecting someone to enter a room, a movement in the corner of your vision might briefly look like them. The missing information gets filled using whatever explanation seems most likely, and your brain does not usually label the result as a guess. It presents it as an experience. That is what makes perception so convincing. You do not feel like you are constantly making predictions. You feel like you are simply seeing what is there. But imagine how strange your visual world would be if your brain stopped filling in the gaps. Every blind spot would become obvious. Every partially hidden object would become uncertain. Every noisy conversation would break apart into disconnected sounds. Every unclear word would become difficult to understand. Every object viewed from an unusual angle might become unfamiliar. Reality would feel fragmented. Your brain prevents that experience by constantly creating continuity. It smooths over missing information. It connects separate pieces. It predicts what should continue behind an obstacle. It uses context to reconstruct what your senses cannot fully provide. And because the process happens automatically, you never experience the gaps themselves. You experience the finished picture. That is why the world feels solid. That is why hidden objects still feel like complete objects. That is why a sentence can make sense even when you miss a word. Your brain is constantly taking incomplete information and turning it into something that feels whole. So when you look around and feel like you are seeing a complete reality, remember what is actually happening. There are gaps everywhere. Your eyes miss information. Your ears miss information. Objects disappear behind other objects. Sounds get buried in noise. Details become unclear, and your brain quietly repairs all of it. You are not experiencing every piece of reality exactly as it arrives. You are experiencing the version your brain has completed for you. And most of the time, you never even notice what was missing. When your brain sees nothing, close your eyes for a moment and imagine what you are seeing. You might say nothing, just darkness. But darkness is not the same thing as seeing nothing. Your brain can create an experience of darkness when there is very little or no visual information coming in. And strangely enough, even when your eyes are closed, your visual system does not simply shut down. Your brain is still active. It is still processing. It is still predicting. And sometimes, when there is almost no information coming from the outside world, the brain can start generating visual experiences from inside itself. That sounds frightening, but it reveals something important about how vision actually works. We often assume that seeing requires something to look at, an object, a light, a person, a landscape. Something outside you has to send information into your eyes, and then your brain turns that information into an image. But your brain is not a passive screen waiting for the world to provide a picture. It is an active system that is constantly generating predictions about what you should be experiencing. Usually, those predictions are constrained by sensory information. You see a chair because light from the chair enters your eyes, and your brain interprets those signals. You see a tree because the visual information coming from the environment matches your brain's model of a tree. But remove much of that sensory information, and something interesting can happen. Your brain still has machinery designed to detect patterns. It still expects there to be visual information. And sometimes that system can produce sensations, even when the outside world provides very little. Think about what happens when you are in a completely dark room. At first, the darkness can feel empty. But if you stay there long enough, you may begin noticing faint shapes, flashes, colors, or patterns. Some of that can come from spontaneous activity in the visual system. Your eyes and brain are never perfectly silent. Neurons are constantly firing. The visual system has background activity even when there is no meaningful image coming from the environment. Normally, the brain interprets that activity in the context of strong sensory input, but when the outside signal becomes extremely weak, those internal signals can become more noticeable. You may see tiny points of light, a faint shimmer, moving patterns, a vague shape. It can feel like something is actually in the room. But sometimes the experience is being generated by the activity of your own visual system. This is one reason complete darkness can feel surprisingly strange. Your brain does not simply switch vision off. It keeps trying to make sense of whatever information is available. And this reveals something we have been building toward throughout this entire idea of perception. Your brain does not need perfect information to create an experience. It can work with fragments. It can fill gaps. It can make predictions. And when sensory information becomes extremely limited, the balance between outside information and internal prediction can change. This does not mean your brain randomly invents everything you see. Far from it. Most of the time, your senses provide strong enough evidence to keep your perception tightly connected to the outside world. But your brain is always contributing something. That becomes easier to notice when the sensory signal is weak. Consider a simple example. You are lying in bed at night. The room is dark. You hear a small sound. You cannot see what caused it. Suddenly your brain creates a possibility. Maybe someone moved. Maybe something fell. Maybe it was the window. The sound itself was ambiguous. Your brain supplied the interpretation. Vision can work in a similar way. When visual information is unclear, the brain relies more heavily on what it expects, and that is why darkness can make ordinary objects feel strange. A pile of clothes can look like a person. A curtain can look like movement. A shadow can seem to have a shape that disappears when you turn on the light. The brain is trying to explain incomplete information. It is not trying to deceive you. It is trying to protect you from uncertainty. There is also an even more surprising phenomenon. Some people can experience vivid visual images when there is no corresponding external object. This can happen for many different reasons, including certain neurological conditions, changes in vision, sensory deprivation, or other situations where the normal relationship between sensory input and perception is disrupted. The important point is that visual experience does not always require a normal visual signal from the outside world. Your brain has the machinery to generate images. That machinery is active whenever you imagine something. Think about imagining a red apple. You can probably picture it. You know roughly what it looks like. But there is no apple in front of you. Your brain is producing a visual representation using memory and imagination. Now imagine what happens when the boundary between incoming sensory information and internally generated information becomes less clear. The brain can sometimes produce experiences that feel surprisingly visual even without a corresponding object outside. This is why perception is so much more complicated than simply saying your eyes see things. Your eyes provide information. Your brain interprets that information, and your brain can also generate information internally. The final experience comes from the interaction between those two sources. That is why seeing is not just about receiving. It is about constructing, and you can see this principle in something as ordinary as dreaming. During a dream, you can experience places, faces, movement, color, and objects even though your eyes are closed and the outside world is not providing the visual scene you experience. Your brain is generating the experience from within. The dream feels real while you are inside it because the same visual systems involved in ordinary perception can participate in internally generated imagery. When you wake up, the experience changes because external sensory information becomes dominant again. The outside world starts constraining the predictions. Your bedroom replaces the dream. The light from the room enters your eyes. Your brain updates its model, and suddenly the world feels solid again. This is what makes perception so fascinating. Your brain is not simply waiting for reality to tell it what is there. It is constantly generating a model and using sensory information to keep that model grounded. When the sensory signal is strong, the outside world has more influence. When the signal becomes weak, internal predictions can play a larger role. And when you understand that, darkness becomes more than the absence of light. It becomes a glimpse into the machinery behind perception. Because when the world stops giving your brain enough information, your brain does not simply stop trying. It keeps searching. It keeps predicting. It keeps constructing. Even when there is almost nothing to see, the system built to create your visual world is still running. And sometimes, in the absence of enough information from outside, you get a rare glimpse of what your brain has been doing all along, creating the experience of seeing. Your brain edits every face. Look at someone you know well and try to notice every detail of their face. The shape of their eyes, the exact curve of their nose, the distance between their eyebrows, the tiny lines around their mouth, the shape of their cheeks. You probably know this person instantly, but if someone asked you to draw their face from memory, you might be surprised by how difficult it is. You can recognize the face almost immediately, yet you cannot accurately describe every part of it. That is because your brain is not storing faces like photographs. It is editing them. Every time you look at someone's face, your brain is selecting certain information, ignoring other information, comparing what it sees with memories, and using context to decide what that face means. You are not simply seeing a face. Your brain is interpreting one. And that interpretation can change depending on what you expect to find. Think about meeting someone for the first time. You know nothing about them. Their face is unfamiliar, so your brain has to gather information. But after you have seen them dozens of times, something changes. You stop consciously analyzing their features. Their face becomes familiar. You can recognize them from a distance. You might even identify them from a tiny glimpse. Your brain has built a powerful internal model of that person. Now imagine that they change something small. They shave their beard. They grow their hair. They start wearing glasses. Suddenly, you might hesitate. For a moment, your brain has to update its prediction. The person is still the same person, but the visual information does not match the version your brain expected. That is how powerful facial prediction can be. Your brain does not need every detail to recognize someone. It needs the right combination of features. And this is where your emotions can start changing what you see. Imagine you walk into a room and notice someone looking at you. If you already believe that person is angry with you, their neutral expression might suddenly look hostile. The corners of their mouth seem tighter. Their eyes seem colder. Their face feels serious. Now imagine you believe that person is happy to see you. The same expression might suddenly look relaxed, maybe even friendly. The face did not necessarily change. Your interpretation changed. Your brain uses expectations to make sense of ambiguous information, and faces are especially vulnerable to this because humans are incredibly sensitive to them. Your brain is constantly scanning faces for signs of emotion, attention, intention, and social meaning. A tiny change in someone's expression can feel important. A raised eyebrow, a brief smile, a tightened jaw, a change in eye contact. Your brain can detect these things extremely quickly. but it does not always interpret them correctly. Sometimes a person is tired, and you think they are angry. Sometimes they are distracted, and you think they are ignoring you. Sometimes they are nervous, and you think they are uncomfortable around you. You are looking at their face, but your brain is trying to answer a much bigger question. What does this person feel about me? That question can influence the face you experience. And there is an even stranger example. Look at a photograph of yourself from years ago. You might immediately think, I look completely different. But someone who has not seen you in years may barely notice the changes. Why? Because your brain has a strong internal representation of your own face. You see yourself repeatedly in mirrors, photographs, videos, and reflections. You know the face so well that even small changes can become extremely noticeable to you. But another person may recognize you using a different set of features. This is one reason people can disagree about whether someone looks different after a haircut, weight change, aging, or a new style. They are not necessarily seeing different physical facts. They may be comparing the face against different internal expectations. And your brain is doing something else every time you look at a familiar person. It is separating identity from temporary appearance. You know that someone is still themselves even when they look tired, angry, sick, excited, or surprised. Their expression changes. Their lighting changes. Their hairstyle changes. Their viewing angle changes. But your brain tries to maintain the identity underneath all those changes. That ability is essential. If your brain treated every new angle as a completely different face, you would struggle to recognize people constantly. Instead, your brain learns what features remain relatively stable. It learns what changes are temporary. It learns how a face behaves across different expressions and lighting conditions. Then it builds a flexible model. This is why you can recognize a friend from the side, from far away, or in a poorly lit room. Your brain is not matching one perfect photograph. It is matching a pattern, and that pattern is constantly being updated. But there is a darker side to this ability, because if your brain can recognize a face from incomplete information, it can also create a face from incomplete information. This is why humans sometimes see faces in places where there are none. A face in the clouds. A face in a pattern on a wall. A face in the front of a car. A face formed by two windows and a doorway. Your brain is extremely sensitive to the basic arrangement of facial features. Two dark spots can become eyes. A line underneath can become a mouth. Suddenly something completely ordinary feels like it is looking back at you. The object did not become a face. Your brain detected a familiar pattern and supplied the meaning. This tendency makes sense from a survival perspective. For humans, faces matter enormously. A face can tell you who someone is, whether they are familiar, whether they might be angry, whether they are paying attention, whether they are safe, whether they need help. Missing a face can sometimes matter more than missing almost any other object. So your brain gives facial information priority. But that priority comes with a cost. You can become convinced that you know what someone is feeling when you are really interpreting a tiny amount of information through your own expectations. That is why facial expressions should never be treated like perfect emotional subtitles. A smile does not always mean happiness. A serious face does not always mean anger. Avoiding eye contact does not automatically mean dishonesty. Your brain wants to turn these signals into clear meanings because clear meanings are easier to act on. But human faces are more complicated than that. Every time you look at someone, Your brain is combining what their face is actually doing with what you already believe about them. It is recognizing patterns, filling gaps, ignoring irrelevant details, comparing the present face with stored memories, and quietly producing an interpretation that feels immediate and obvious. You do not experience all of those calculations. You simply look at the person and feel like you see their face. But what you are really experiencing is your brain's edited version of that face. And sometimes, the most important thing your brain adds is not in their expression at all. It is in your own expectations. Why shadows fool you? A shadow can make you see something that is not actually there. You walk into a dark room and notice a shape in the corner. For a second, it looks like a person standing completely still. Your body reacts before your thinking catches up. Your attention locks onto it. You stare. Then the light changes. It is just a chair. Nothing about the chair suddenly became different. Your brain simply had too little information and filled in the missing details with the most convincing explanation it could find. That is why shadows are so good at fooling you. A shadow removes information. It hides color, texture, edges, and small details. Instead of seeing the complete object, your eyes receive a simplified pattern of light and darkness. Your brain then has to figure out what that pattern probably represents. And your brain is extremely good at recognizing familiar shapes. A dark shape with two smaller shapes above it can start looking like a face. A vertical shadow can look like a person. A moving patch of darkness can look like something walking. The brain is not waiting for perfect evidence. It is making a fast prediction. This is especially powerful when you are already expecting danger. Imagine hearing a noise while walking through a dark parking lot. You look toward a nearby car and notice a shadow moving across the ground. If you are relaxed, you might assume it is a tree moving in the wind. If you are already frightened, your brain may immediately consider a person. The shadow itself has not changed. Your expectations have changed what the shadow means. This happens because your brain combines sensory information with context. It does not ask only, "What am I seeing?" It also asks, "What could this mean right now?" When the information is unclear, that second question becomes extremely important. And shadows create uncertainty everywhere. They make objects look larger or smaller. They hide boundaries. They merge separate objects together. They can make a flat surface appear deep. They can make something stationary appear to move when the light source changes. Your brain has to interpret all of this while knowing that lighting constantly changes throughout the day. A tree at noon does not cast the same shadow as a tree at sunset. A person standing under a streetlight can look completely different from the same person standing in sunlight. Your brain has learned that shadows usually belong to objects, so it tries to mentally separate the object from the darkness around it. Most of the time, it succeeds. But when the information is ambiguous, the brain can choose the wrong explanation. This is why you can sometimes see faces in curtains, figures in clothing piles, or animals in bushes. Your brain is detecting patterns that resemble things it already knows. Humans are especially sensitive to faces because faces carry enormous amounts of social information. A false face is usually less costly than completely missing a real one. So your brain can become very eager to detect facial patterns. Two dark areas can become eyes. A horizontal line can become a mouth. Suddenly a random pattern looks like someone staring at you. You know intellectually that it is just a shadow, but for a brief moment, your perception can still feel real. That is the important distinction. Knowing something is not real does not always stop your brain from seeing the possibility. Your conscious mind can correct the interpretation after your visual system has already made its prediction. And this is why darkness can make ordinary environments feel completely different. The objects have not necessarily changed. Your access to information has changed. When there is plenty of light, you can see details that help your brain identify objects confidently. When there is little light, those details disappear. The brain has more uncertainty to deal with. And when uncertainty increases, prediction becomes more important. So the next time a shadow makes you stop for a second, remember what is really happening. Your eyes are giving your brain incomplete information. Your brain is searching for a familiar explanation. And when the evidence is unclear, it may choose a story before it has all the facts. The shadow did not become a person. Your brain briefly turned uncertainty into one. Your brain changes what you hear. Have you ever been listening to someone in a noisy room and suddenly realized you could understand them perfectly, even though half the sounds around you were competing for your attention? Your ears were receiving all of it. The music, the conversations, the clinking glasses, the traffic outside, people laughing. Yet somehow, your brain pulled one voice out of that mess and made it understandable. That is because hearing is not simply about what enters your ears. Your brain changes what you hear. Think about a sentence spoken in a crowded restaurant. You might miss a few words because someone nearby starts talking. But instead of hearing meaningless fragments, your brain often fills in what was probably said. If someone says, "Please pass," you can almost predict what comes next. Salt, water, menu. Your brain uses context to complete the sound. You are not consciously guessing every missing word. The prediction happens automatically, and this can completely change your experience of a conversation. Imagine someone says a word that could have two meanings. Your brain does not wait until the end of the sentence and then calmly decide which meaning was correct. It uses the surrounding words, the situation, and your expectations to interpret the sound as quickly as possible. That is why the same sound can be heard differently depending on what you expect. If someone tells you to listen for a particular word in a recording, you suddenly start noticing that word. If you expect someone to say your name, a similar sound can grab your attention. If you are thinking about a particular subject, words connected to that subject seem to stand out more. Your brain is not just receiving sound. It is constantly deciding what the sound probably means. This becomes even clearer when someone speaks with an unfamiliar accent. At first, their words might seem difficult to understand. The sounds are reaching your ears normally, but your brain does not have a strong prediction model for that particular speaking pattern. After listening for a while, something changes. You adapt. The accent becomes easier. The speaker suddenly seems clearer. Their voice did not necessarily change. Your brain learned how to interpret it. And the same thing happens with familiar voices. You can recognize someone you know from just a few words, sometimes even before you consciously identify them. Your brain has learned their rhythm, pitch, pronunciation, and speaking patterns. It compares the incoming sound with that stored pattern. Then it produces the feeling of recognition. But your brain can also make mistakes. Have you ever thought someone called your name in a crowded place, only to turn around and realize they did not? You may have heard something that resembled your name. Your brain knows your name is important. So when the sound was unclear, it gave that possibility extra attention. This is useful because your name can signal that someone is trying to get your attention. But it also means your expectations can influence what you think you heard. The same principle appears when you listen to a song. Sometimes you cannot understand a lyric until you read the words. Then you listen again, and suddenly the lyric sounds obvious. The recording did not change. Your brain changed its expectation. Once you know what words to look for, the sound becomes easier to interpret. This shows how much context matters. Your ears provide signals. Your brain turns those signals into meaningful sounds. And when the signal is incomplete, your brain uses what it already knows to fill the gaps. That is why hearing is not a perfect recording either. You are not walking around with a microphone inside your head. You are experiencing an interpretation. Most of the time, that interpretation is incredibly accurate. But when the information is unclear, your brain has to guess. Sometimes it guesses correctly. Sometimes it does not. And you usually experience both situations with the same feeling of certainty. You do not think, "My brain is currently making a prediction about what that person said." You think, "I heard them say it." That is what makes perception so convincing. Your brain hides the process. It gives you the finished experience. So the next time you misunderstand someone in a noisy room, remember that your ears may not have failed at all. Your brain was simply trying to turn incomplete sound into a meaningful world. And sometimes, what you hear is not just what reached your ears. It is what your brain believed those sounds were supposed to mean. The sound inside silence, silence is never as silent as you think. Sit alone in a completely quiet room and listen carefully. At first, you might hear nothing. Then, after a few seconds, you may notice a faint ringing, a soft buzzing, a low hum, or some strange sound that seems to be coming from nowhere. You might even wonder if something in the room is making it. But sometimes, the sound is coming from you. Your brain does not need an external noise to create the experience of sound. Your hearing system is always active. Neurons inside your auditory system continue producing electrical activity even when there is no meaningful sound coming from the outside world. Most of the time, external sounds are strong enough to dominate that background activity. But when the environment becomes extremely quiet, those internal signals can become noticeable. Suddenly, silence does not feel empty anymore. You become aware of sounds you normally ignore: your breathing, your heartbeat, the faint movement of your body, a subtle ringing in your ears. Even the tiny noises produced by your own muscles and blood flow can become noticeable when everything around you becomes quiet. This reveals something strange about hearing. Your brain does not simply wait for sound to arrive. It is constantly monitoring the auditory system and trying to determine what the signals mean. In a busy environment, that process is easy because there is plenty of information. But in silence, there is very little external information to work with. So the brain becomes more sensitive to internal activity. This is why a completely quiet room can sometimes feel uncomfortable. You suddenly become aware of things that were always there, and your attention makes them seem louder. Think about a faint ringing sound in your ears. If you ignore it, you may barely notice it. But once you focus on it, it can suddenly seem much stronger. The sound itself may not have changed. Your attention changed its importance. Your brain is essentially turning up the volume on something that was already in the background. The same thing happens with bodily sensations. You can become suddenly aware of your heartbeat simply because you are paying attention to it. You may notice your breathing more strongly when someone tells you to focus on it. You may become aware of swallowing, blinking, or the feeling of your clothes against your skin. Attention can bring quiet signals into conscious experience, and silence gives attention more room to do that. There is another reason silence can feel strange. Your brain is used to predicting sound. You expect footsteps when someone approaches. You expect a door to make a sound when it closes. You expect traffic outside. You expect the refrigerator to hum. When those sounds disappear, your brain notices the difference. The absence itself becomes information. That is why sudden silence can feel more dramatic than continuous quiet. If a fan has been running for hours and suddenly stops, you notice immediately. The room seems different. Nothing visible changed, but your brain detected a prediction error. It expected the sound to continue. Instead, there was silence, and silence can sometimes make your brain more alert. This is especially obvious at night. During the day, there are countless sounds competing for attention. At night, many of those sounds disappear. A small creak suddenly becomes important. A distant vehicle sounds much louder. A tiny movement outside the room can grab your attention. The physical sound may be weak, but because the background is quiet, your brain gives it priority. This is another example of how perception depends on context. A sound does not have a fixed psychological loudness. Its meaning and importance depend partly on what surrounds it. A whisper in a silent room can feel powerful. The same whisper in a crowded stadium might disappear completely. The sound waves may be similar. Your experience is not. And that is why silence can reveal something about your brain that noise hides. When the outside world becomes quiet, you get a glimpse of the activity happening inside your own sensory system. You discover that hearing is not simply about receiving sounds. It is about interpreting signals. Your brain is constantly deciding what is coming from outside, what is coming from inside, what matters, and what can be ignored. Most of the time, you never notice this process. You simply hear the world. But when the world becomes silent, the filter becomes easier to notice. The quietest moments can suddenly become filled with tiny sounds. Some come from your environment. Some come from your body. Some come from the activity of your own nervous system. And the more carefully you listen, the more you realize something strange. Silence is not necessarily the absence of sound. Sometimes it is simply the moment when you finally notice the sounds your brain normally keeps hidden. Why familiar places feel wrong. Have you ever walked into a room you have seen 100 times and suddenly felt like something was wrong? Nothing obvious. The walls are the same. The furniture is where it normally is. The lighting looks familiar, but something feels off. You cannot immediately explain it, yet your brain knows the environment is not matching what it expected. That strange feeling comes from how heavily your brain relies on prediction. When you enter a familiar place, you are not seeing it from scratch. Your brain already has a mental model of what should be there. You know where the door is. You know where the table should be. You know what the room usually sounds like. You know where the light switch is. You expect certain objects to be in certain positions. Because the environment is predictable, your brain can process it quickly. But change one small thing, and that prediction can suddenly break. Move a chair. Remove a painting. Leave a door open that is normally closed. Change the lighting. Your brain may detect the difference before you consciously understand what changed. You simply feel that something is wrong. This happens because your brain is constantly comparing what it expects with what it receives. When they match, you barely notice. When they do not match, attention increases. That mismatch becomes important. Imagine walking into your kitchen and seeing that one cabinet door is slightly open. You might notice it immediately. Why? Because your brain already knows the normal appearance of the room. The open cabinet creates a tiny prediction error. Your brain does not need to inspect every cabinet to realize something changed. It compares the current scene with the model it already has. And this same process can happen with places you have not visited for a long time. You return to your childhood home after many years. The basic layout is familiar, but something feels different. Maybe the rooms seem smaller. Maybe the colors have changed. Maybe the furniture is gone. The place exists physically, but your internal version of it belongs to an older period of your life. Your brain is comparing two versions of the same environment. The place you remember and the place you are actually seeing. That gap can create a powerful feeling of unfamiliarity. It is one reason familiar places can sometimes feel strangely unreal. Your brain expects one experience and receives another. The same thing can happen when you visit a familiar place at an unusual time. A school at night, a shopping street before sunrise, an office on a weekend, a normally crowded park when it is completely empty. The location has not changed much, but the context has. Your brain expects certain sounds, people, movements, and lighting conditions. Remove those signals and the environment suddenly feels unfamiliar. The place can look almost exactly the same while feeling completely different. This is because your perception of a place is not based only on its physical structure. It also includes expectations about what normally happens there. A school is not just walls and classrooms. Your brain associates it with students, voices, movement, bells, and routines. Take those away, and the same building can feel strange. A hospital feels different at midnight. A city feels different during a power outage. Your own home can feel different when every light is off. The physical environment is only part of the experience. Your brain adds meaning and expectation. And when those expectations break, the environment can suddenly feel wrong. There is something similar that happens when you become extremely tired. Your ability to process information normally can change. Familiar places may feel slightly strange because the brain is working with less reliable attention and prediction. The environment itself has not necessarily become unusual. Your experience of it has. This is an important reminder that familiarity is not simply stored in the place. It exists partly inside your brain. A familiar room feels familiar because your brain has learned its patterns. It knows what to expect. It knows what belongs. It knows what usually happens there. That knowledge creates a sense of stability. And when something violates the pattern, you notice. This is why even tiny changes in your home can sometimes bother you without you knowing why. A picture is slightly lower. A chair is facing a different direction. A lamp has moved. Something is missing from a shelf. Your conscious mind may not immediately identify the change, but your brain can detect that the overall pattern is different. You get that strange feeling first. The explanation comes later. And this is another example of how perception works. Your brain is not simply recording what is around you. It is constantly comparing the present with what it already knows. Familiarity makes the world easier to process, but that same familiarity creates expectations. When reality matches those expectations, everything feels normal. When reality breaks them, even a perfectly ordinary place can suddenly feel strange. So the next time you walk into a familiar room and feel that something is wrong, do not assume the feeling is meaningless. Your brain may have noticed a tiny difference before your conscious mind did. You may not know what changed yet, but your prediction system already knows one thing. This is not exactly the world I expected to see. Your brain sees patterns everywhere. Look at a wall with random stains for long enough, and something strange can happen. You might see a face. Two dark marks become eyes. A crack becomes a mouth. Suddenly, a completely ordinary wall looks like someone is staring back at you. But there is no face there. Your brain created one. And this tendency is happening far more often than you realize. Your brain is constantly searching for patterns because patterns make the world easier to understand. Instead of treating every piece of information as something completely new, your brain looks for connections, repetition, and familiar structures. That is why you can recognize a friend's face in a crowded room almost instantly. You do not inspect every face one by one. Your brain detects a familiar arrangement and immediately says, "That is them." The same thing happens when you recognize a song after hearing only a few notes. Your brain does not need the entire song. A small pattern is enough to trigger the larger one. This ability is incredibly useful. Imagine trying to understand the world without recognizing patterns. Every morning, you would have to relearn what a door does. Every time you saw a car, you would have to figure out from scratch that it moves on roads. Every conversation would be completely unpredictable. Your brain saves enormous amounts of effort by identifying patterns and using previous experience to predict what comes next. But there is a strange side effect. Your brain sometimes finds patterns even when there is no meaningful pattern there. That is why people see faces in clouds. It is why the front of a car can look like a face. It is why random sounds can sometimes seem like words. Your brain would rather find a familiar pattern in meaningless information than ignore a potentially important pattern. From a survival perspective, that makes sense. Imagine living thousands of years ago and hearing a strange sound in the bushes. It could be the wind, or it could be an animal. If your brain immediately assumes it is nothing and it turns out to be a predator, that mistake could be dangerous. But if your brain assumes there might be something there and it turns out to be the wind, you lose very little. So the brain becomes sensitive to possible patterns. It searches, it connects, it predicts, and sometimes it gets carried away. This is also why coincidences can feel so meaningful. You think about an old friend, and they message you later that day. You start noticing the same number everywhere. You hear a phrase in two different conversations. Your brain immediately starts connecting the events. Maybe there is a deeper connection. Maybe it is just coincidence. The important thing is that your brain is extremely uncomfortable with random information. It wants a story. It wants a cause. It wants things to fit together. This can be useful, but it can also fool you. If you already believe something is true, you may start noticing evidence that supports it everywhere. Imagine you buy a particular type of car. Suddenly you notice that car constantly. It feels like there are suddenly hundreds of them on the road. But most likely, the number of cars did not suddenly increase. Your attention changed. Your brain had a new pattern to search for. The same thing can happen with people. If you believe someone dislikes you, small things can suddenly look connected. They reply late. They look away. They seem quiet. Your brain can combine those separate events into one pattern. They do not like me. but someone else might interpret the same events completely differently. That is because patterns are not always discovered. Sometimes they are constructed. Your brain takes separate pieces of information and decides whether they belong together. And once a pattern becomes familiar, it becomes easier to see again. This is why habits are so powerful. Your brain learns repeated sequences and begins predicting them automatically. You wake up and follow the same routine without thinking. You walk the same route and barely notice every turn. You can type familiar words without consciously thinking about every finger movement. The pattern has become automatic. But the same system can create blind spots. When you become too comfortable with a pattern, you may stop noticing changes that do not fit. You assume the next event will be like the previous one. You assume a person will behave the way they usually do. You assume a familiar situation will produce the same result. Then reality surprises you. That surprise is your brain discovering that its pattern was incomplete. And that is one of the most fascinating things about perception. Your brain is not simply looking at the world. It is constantly trying to organize the world into something understandable. It searches for faces. It searches for causes. It searches for repetition. It searches for meaning. It connects separate pieces and turns them into a story. Most of the time, this makes life easier. But sometimes the pattern your brain finds is not actually there. The face in the cloud is not a face. The coincidence is not necessarily a message. The random noise is not necessarily a voice. The person who seemed angry may simply have been tired. Your brain does not see patterns because reality is always perfectly organized. It sees patterns because recognizing patterns is one of the main ways it makes sense of reality. And once you understand that, you start noticing something strange. You are not just living in a world full of patterns. You are living in a world your brain is constantly trying to turn into patterns. When your memory changes reality, think about one of your strongest memories. Maybe you remember a family trip, a childhood birthday, a serious argument, a moment when something went terribly wrong. You can probably picture where you were standing. You may remember what someone was wearing, what the room looked like, maybe even what you were thinking at the time. It feels like you are opening a file stored inside your brain. But memory does not work like a recording. Every time you remember something, your brain reconstructs it. And that means your memory can actually change the way you experience the past. Imagine you remember an argument from years ago. You remember what the other person said. You remember their expression. You remember how angry you felt. But over time, you hear other people's versions of what happened. You think about it repeatedly. You learn new information. Your emotions change. Each time you revisit the memory, your brain can rebuild parts of it. Some details become stronger. Others disappear. Some details can even be added without you realizing it. And after enough time, the reconstructed version can feel completely real. This is why confidence is not the same thing as accuracy. Someone can be absolutely certain that they remember an event correctly and still be mistaken about important details. Your brain does not store every moment of your life in perfect detail. That would be impossible. Instead, memory keeps important information, patterns, emotions, and meaningful details, then reconstructs the rest when you need it. Think about your childhood home. You probably remember the general layout. You know where the rooms were. You can picture certain objects. But can you remember exactly what every wall looked like on a random Tuesday? Probably not. Your brain fills in what is missing using what it knows. That usually works well, but sometimes the details are wrong. And because the memory feels familiar, the brain does not automatically label those details as guesses. They can feel like part of the original event. This becomes especially interesting when emotion is involved. Emotional experiences can create very strong memories. You may remember exactly where you were when you received shocking news. You may remember who was around you. You may remember the feeling in your body, but strong emotion does not guarantee perfect accuracy. In fact, intense emotion can make certain details feel extremely vivid while other details remain unclear. Your brain remembers what seemed important, not necessarily everything that happened. That is why two people can experience the same event and later remember it differently. Both may be sincere. Both may feel certain, but their brains paid attention to different details. One person remembers the words. The other remembers the expression. One remembers what happened first. The other remembers what happened afterward. Their memories are shaped by what they noticed, what they believed, and what they felt. And memory can also be influenced by information that comes later. Imagine you lose your phone and spend an hour searching for it. Later, someone tells you they remember seeing you put it on the kitchen counter. You start thinking about that possibility. Eventually, you may develop a stronger memory of placing the phone there yourself, even if you never actually remember doing it. The suggestion can become mixed with the original memory. Your brain is trying to create a coherent story, and coherence can sometimes be more important than perfect accuracy. This is why eyewitness memory can be complicated. People may honestly remember seeing something that did not happen exactly the way they remember it. The brain is not lying, it is reconstructing, and reconstruction is influenced by expectations. If you already believe someone was responsible for an event, later information about that person can affect how you remember what happened. If you believe a situation was dangerous, you may remember certain details as more threatening than they seemed at the time. Your current beliefs can influence your version of the past. That sounds strange because we think the past is fixed, and physically it is. What happened happened, but your access to what happened is through memory. And memory is something your brain rebuilds. This means the past you experience inside your mind is not a perfect copy of the original event. It is a reconstruction created in the present. That is why remembering something can sometimes feel like changing it. You bring an old event into your current emotional world. You interpret it using what you know today. You may understand the people involved differently. You may have learned things that were invisible to you at the time. You may feel differently about yourself. All of that can influence how the memory is reconstructed. And there is something deeply human about this. Your memories help create your identity. You tell yourself stories about who you were, what happened to you, what you survived, what you achieved, and what people did to you. Those stories influence how you behave today. But some of those stories are built from memories that have been edited many times. That does not make your experiences meaningless. It means the brain cares more about creating a useful, coherent understanding of your life than preserving a perfect historical record. Your memory is not a video archive. It is more like a story your brain rebuilds whenever you open it. And every time you remember the story, there is a possibility that the story changes slightly. The event stays in the past, but the version of it inside your mind can keep evolving. Your brain predicts your next thought. Have you ever suddenly thought about someone and then wondered why that person came to mind? You were not deliberately thinking about them. Their name just appeared. Maybe you were doing something completely unrelated, and suddenly an old memory surfaced. It can feel like your thoughts are arriving from nowhere. But your brain is not generating thoughts randomly. A huge part of thinking is prediction. Your brain is constantly using what you have experienced, what you are currently seeing, and what you are expecting to happen to prepare for what comes next. And that includes your own thoughts. Think about finishing someone's sentence. You hear them say, "I cannot believe you actually." Before they finish, your brain may already predict the next word. You did not consciously calculate every possible sentence. Your brain used the context and predicted what was likely to come next. The same thing happens when you read. You rarely process every word with equal attention. Your brain anticipates what is coming based on the words already present. That is why you can sometimes understand a sentence even when a word is missing. Your mind is constantly moving slightly ahead of the information it is receiving. And this predictive system also shapes your internal thoughts. Imagine you are thinking about your childhood. One memory leads to another. A smell reminds you of a place. The place reminds you of a person. That person reminds you of something they once said. Suddenly, you are thinking about an event you had not remembered in years. It feels random, but your brain may have been following a chain of associations. One idea activated another. One memory made another memory more accessible. Your next thought emerged from the patterns already active in your mind. This is why thoughts can sometimes feel like they have a momentum of their own. You think about work. Then you remember an unfinished task. That reminds you of an email. The email reminds you of a person. Then you suddenly remember something you forgot to do. The chain can move incredibly quickly. You are not consciously choosing every step. Your brain is constantly activating related information and predicting what is most likely to become relevant next. And your current environment can influence those predictions without you noticing. Walk into a bakery and you may suddenly think about food. Hear a song from your teenage years and memories from that period can come rushing back. Smell a particular perfume and you may suddenly remember a person you have not thought about in years. The outside world is constantly feeding your brain clues. Your brain connects those clues to stored patterns. Then thoughts emerge. This is one reason your mental state matters so much. When you are anxious, your brain becomes more likely to predict threats. A small physical sensation can lead to a worrying thought. A delayed message can trigger a negative interpretation. A neutral expression can become evidence that something is wrong. The brain is not necessarily responding to reality alone. It is responding to what it expects reality might mean. The same system can work positively. When you are excited about something, your brain becomes more sensitive to information connected to that goal. You start noticing opportunities. You remember related ideas. You connect things that might help. Your thoughts seem more creative because your brain is making more connections between patterns that are already stored. And sometimes the next thought feels so sudden that you assume you consciously created it from nothing. But your brain was probably doing work beneath awareness. Millions of signals are being processed all the time. Memories are being activated. Sensory information is being evaluated. Emotional signals are being updated. Associations are competing for attention. Eventually, one thought becomes strong enough to enter conscious awareness. and that is the thought you experience. This is why you often know what you are going to say before you consciously decide exactly how to say it. It is why you can finish a familiar phrase without thinking. It is why a joke can suddenly come to you. It is why the answer to a problem sometimes appears after you stop actively working on it. Your conscious mind experiences the result, but much of the preparation happened underneath it. Your brain was searching through patterns and predicting which idea should come next. That does not mean you have no control over your thoughts. You can direct attention. You can deliberately change what you focus on. You can interrupt a thought. You can choose to examine an assumption instead of following it, but you do not consciously manufacture every thought from scratch. Many thoughts arrive before you have decided to have them, and that is what makes the experience of thinking so strange. You feel like the author of every thought, but sometimes you are more like the person receiving the next sentence from a system that has been working quietly in the background. Your brain is constantly predicting what information should become important next. Sometimes it predicts a sound, sometimes a movement, sometimes a memory, sometimes a feeling, and sometimes it predicts the next thought. The thought appears, you notice it, and because you never felt the prediction happening, it seems like it simply came from nowhere. But it did not come from nowhere. It came from everything your brain was already processing before you became aware of it. Why fear changes what you see. Walk through a dark room alone at night, and a completely ordinary object can suddenly look dangerous. A jacket hanging on a chair can look like a person. A shadow in the hallway can look like someone standing there. A small movement in the corner of your eye can feel like something approaching you. Then you turn on the light. Nothing is there. The jacket is still a jacket. The hallway is still empty. So why did you see danger in the first place? Because fear changes the way your brain interprets information. When you are afraid, your brain does not process the world exactly the same way it does when you feel safe. It becomes more alert to anything that could possibly matter for your survival. Your attention narrows, your body becomes ready to react, and your brain starts searching the environment for signs of danger. The important word is possible. Your brain does not need proof before becoming cautious. Imagine you are walking through a forest and hear a sudden sound behind you. It could be a branch moving in the wind. It could be an animal. It could be another person. You do not have enough information to know. But your brain has to make a decision quickly. If it assumes there is nothing there, and it is wrong, the consequences could be serious. If it assumes there might be danger, and it turns out to be nothing, you simply become cautious for a moment. So your brain is biased toward detecting possible threats. That bias can keep you safe, but it can also make harmless things look threatening. Fear changes the meaning of ambiguous information. A dark shape is no longer just a dark shape. Your brain asks whether it could be a person. A strange sound is no longer just noise. Your brain asks whether it could be danger. A neutral facial expression can suddenly look angry. Your brain is searching for evidence that matches the state it is already in. This is why fear can feel like it changes the entire environment. The room has not necessarily changed. Your brain's expectations have. Think about walking through a parking lot late at night. During the day, you might barely notice a person standing near a car. At night, the same person can immediately capture your attention. You watch their movement. You notice how far away they are. You wonder where they are going. Your brain is gathering information because the situation feels more uncertain. The darkness has removed visual details. Your brain has less evidence, so prediction becomes more important. And when fear is present, those predictions can become more threatening. This does not mean fear makes you imagine everything. It means fear changes what your brain considers important. A person who is relaxed might notice the color of a building. A frightened person might notice the nearest exit. A relaxed person might hear background music. A frightened person might hear footsteps. The same environment can produce different experiences because the brain is looking for different information. This is also why anxiety can make you feel like you are constantly noticing things that could go wrong. Your brain becomes tuned toward possible threats. You may notice a strange expression, a delayed message, a small sound, a change in someone's voice. Your attention keeps returning to information that might confirm your concern. And once your brain expects danger, ambiguous signals can feel more convincing. This can create a loop. You feel afraid. Your brain searches for danger. You notice something uncertain. Your brain interprets it as possible danger. That interpretation makes you more afraid. Now you search even harder. The environment begins to feel increasingly threatening, even though the original situation may not have changed much. This is one reason fear can distort perception so powerfully. Your brain is trying to protect you by preparing for the worst possibility. It is not trying to give you a perfectly neutral picture of reality. Survival comes first. If something might be dangerous, your brain wants you to notice it quickly. And sometimes that means accepting false alarms. A harmless shadow is better than a missed predator. A strange sound that turns out to be nothing is better than ignoring a real threat. The problem is that modern life is full of uncertainty without the kind of physical danger our brains evolved to handle. A message can feel threatening. A social situation can feel dangerous. A facial expression can trigger fear. Your brain can use the same ancient prediction system even when there is no immediate physical threat. That is why understanding fear can be so useful. When you feel afraid, you are not necessarily seeing more reality. You may be seeing reality through a brain that has temporarily increased the importance of possible danger. Your senses are still collecting information, but your brain is interpreting that information differently. So the next time something looks threatening in a moment of fear, pause before trusting the first interpretation completely. The danger might be real, but it might also be your brain doing what it was designed to do. Take incomplete information. Predict the worst possibility, and make sure you are ready before you have all the facts. Fear does not simply change how you feel. Sometimes, it changes what the world looks like. Your brain creates distance. Think about the last time you looked at a mountain far away. It seemed enormous, but also strangely small. You knew it was huge, yet your eyes received an image that was tiny compared with the same mountain up close. Your brain had to solve a problem. How can something look small on your eyes, but enormous in the real world? The answer is that your brain creates the experience of distance. Your eyes do not directly measure how far away something is. They receive patterns of light. Your brain takes those patterns and combines them with everything it already knows about size, depth, movement, and perspective. That is why you can look across a room and instantly know which objects are close and which ones are far away without consciously calculating anything. Imagine holding your hand directly in front of your face. Now move it toward the other side of the room. The image of your hand on your eyes becomes smaller as it moves away, but you do not experience your hand shrinking. Your brain understands that the change is caused by distance. It uses context to keep the object stable. This ability is called size constancy. Your brain has learned that familiar objects have relatively stable sizes, so when their image becomes smaller, it interprets that change as increasing distance, rather than the object physically shrinking, and your brain uses many clues to create this experience. Objects that are closer usually appear larger. Objects farther away appear smaller. Parallel lines seem to move closer together as they extend into the distance. Nearby objects can block objects behind them. When you move your head, nearby objects appear to shift more dramatically than distant ones. Your brain combines all of these clues almost instantly. You never consciously think, that object moved across my visual field by this amount. Therefore, it must be approximately this far away. You simply experience depth. And this is where things get strange. Your brain can create a strong feeling of distance, even when the actual visual information is limited. That is why a photograph can look three-dimensional. A flat screen contains no physical depth in the image itself, yet your brain can experience people, buildings, and landscapes as existing at different distances. The photograph gives your brain enough visual clues to construct a three-dimensional scene. Your brain does the rest. This is also why perspective can fool you. A long road appears to narrow as it moves toward the horizon. The road is not actually getting narrower. The lines representing its edges are getting closer together in your visual field. Your brain has learned that this pattern usually means distance, so it interprets the image as a road extending away from you. Now imagine seeing two identical objects, one close to you and one far away. The nearby object looks larger. The distant object looks smaller. But if you know they are the same size, your brain does not conclude that one has shrunk. It adjusts for distance. This is happening constantly. A person walking toward you gets larger in your vision. You do not think they are growing. You think they are approaching. A car driving away becomes smaller. You do not think the car is shrinking. You know it is moving farther away. Your brain is constantly separating changes in appearance from changes in physical size, and movement gives it another powerful clue. When you move through the world, nearby objects seem to move across your visual field quickly. Distant objects seem to move much more slowly. Look out of a car window. Nearby trees can rush past. Distant mountains barely seem to move. Your brain uses this difference to estimate depth. This is called motion parallax, and you experience it every time you move through an environment. It is one of the reasons the world feels three-dimensional. But your brain can also be fooled when these clues conflict. That is why optical illusions involving perspective can make objects appear much closer, farther away, larger or smaller than they really are. Your brain is not measuring distance with a perfect internal ruler. It is making an educated estimate. Most of the time, that estimate is incredibly accurate because you have spent your entire life learning how visual patterns correspond to physical space. You have learned what nearby objects look like. You have learned how distant objects behave. You have learned how shadows, perspective, movement, and size relate to depth. All of that knowledge becomes part of how you see, and you rarely notice the learning anymore. It simply feels like distance is visible. But distance itself is not painted onto the world. Your brain constructs the experience from clues. That is why the same room can feel larger or smaller depending on lighting, furniture, perspective, and familiarity. A completely empty room can feel enormous. Put furniture inside it and suddenly it feels smaller. A narrow hallway can look longer when there are strong lines leading toward the end. A familiar room can feel smaller than it did when you were a child because your brain now has a different reference for scale. The physical space may be unchanged. Your perception of it is not, and that is the important part. You do not simply see objects sitting at different distances. Your brain continuously calculates where those objects probably exist in relation to you. It turns flat patterns of light into a world with depth. It makes tiny images feel enormous when they are far away. It prevents nearby objects from feeling artificially huge. It uses movement and perspective to estimate space, and it does all of this so quickly that distance feels like something you simply see. But your eyes never hand you distance directly. Your brain creates it from clues. The world feels three-dimensional because your brain is constantly building the space between you and everything you see. Why time feels uneven? Have you ever checked the clock and felt like it was barely moving? You look again. Only 3 minutes have passed. It feels impossible. Then something strange happens. You get distracted, start talking to someone, or become completely absorbed in what you are doing. You check the clock again. An hour is gone. The clock never changed its speed. Your experience of time did. Your brain does not experience every second equally. It constantly changes how much attention it gives to time, and that can make the exact same minute feel incredibly long or strangely short. Think about waiting for something important. You are watching your phone. You check the time. Nothing. You check again. Still nothing. Every few seconds becomes noticeable because your attention is focused directly on the passage of time. Your brain is monitoring the waiting itself. That makes each moment feel larger. Now compare that with spending an evening laughing with friends. You are talking, listening, reacting, remembering stories, thinking about what to say next. You are not monitoring every passing second. Then suddenly you look at the clock. 3 hours have disappeared. Nothing about physical time changed. Your attention changed. This is one reason boredom can make time feel painfully slow. When there is very little happening, your brain has fewer things competing for attention. So you become more aware of yourself. You notice the room. You notice your thoughts. And you notice time passing. The more you monitor time, the more noticeable each moment becomes. But when something captures your attention completely, time can almost disappear from your awareness. This is why people often say time flies when they are having fun. It is not because happiness literally speeds up the clock. It is because attention has moved somewhere else, and emotion can distort time even more. Imagine suddenly hearing a loud sound while you are alone at night. For a brief moment, everything can feel unusually slow. You notice the sound. You notice your surroundings. You become intensely aware of your body. Your brain is processing information rapidly because the situation might matter. During moments of fear or danger, people sometimes report that events seem to unfold in slow motion. The experience can feel incredibly vivid, but that does not necessarily mean the brain literally slowed physical time. Your brain may simply be paying much more attention and storing more information than usual. Later, when you remember the event, that dense memory can make the moment feel longer, and this creates another strange effect. Time can feel different while something is happening compared with how long that same period feels when you remember it. Think about a vacation. While you are there, the days can disappear quickly. You are busy exploring. Everything is happening. Your attention is constantly moving. But months later, that same vacation may feel enormous in your memory. Why? Because it contains so many distinctive moments. New places, new people, new experiences. Your brain has more memorable information to work with. Now compare that with a routine week. Wake up, work, eat, sleep, repeat. While you are living it, the week may feel normal, but later it can seem like nothing happened at all. The days blend together. Your brain has fewer distinctive memories separating one day from another. So the experience of time depends partly on what your brain notices and remembers. This is why childhood can seem incredibly long when you look back. When you are young, so much of life is new. Your first school, your first close friendships, new places, new experiences, new discoveries. Your brain is constantly learning. As you get older, routines become more common. You already know how many ordinary situations work. Your brain does not need to treat every moment as completely new. That can make long periods of life feel compressed when you remember them. The physical amount of time is identical. The psychological experience is not. And there is something even stranger about this. Two people can experience the exact same amount of time and remember it differently. One person may remember an hour as incredibly long. Another may remember it as brief. Their clocks were synchronized, their brains were not. That is because time is not experienced by a single simple clock inside your head. It emerges from attention, emotion, memory, expectation, and the amount of information your brain is processing. When you are waiting, time becomes the object of attention. When you are absorbed, time moves into the background. When you are frightened, your brain can become intensely focused on details. When you experience something new, your memory can become richer. All of these can change how time feels. So when you say that a day disappeared, you are not saying something irrational. You are describing your brain's experience of that day. The clock measured the same hours. Your mind did not experience them in equal pieces. Some moments became huge. Some vanished almost instantly. Some stayed in memory for years. Others disappeared almost as soon as they ended. Time itself may be perfectly consistent, but the way your brain experiences time is anything but consistent. Your brain does not simply measure time. It decides how much of it you actually feel. Think about looking at a photograph with part of it covered. You can still recognize the person. You can still understand the scene. You can even imagine what is hidden behind the covered area. But here is the strange part. You are not actually seeing those missing details. Your brain is inventing them. Every moment, your senses give your brain incomplete information. Something is hidden behind an object. A sound is covered by noise. A face is partly blocked. A word is unclear. And instead of stopping and saying, "I do not know," your brain usually makes its best guess. Most of the time, you never notice. Imagine seeing someone standing behind a table. You can see their head and shoulders, but the table blocks the rest of their body. You do not experience a floating head. You automatically assume their body continues behind the table. You are not consciously creating that image. Your brain does it instantly because it has learned that objects usually continue even when part of them is hidden. This ability makes everyday life much easier. If your brain needed to see every part of an object before recognizing it, the world would be incredibly confusing. A person walking behind a car would seem to disappear. A cup partly hidden behind a book might become unrecognizable. A familiar face would stop making sense whenever something blocked part of it. Instead, Your brain uses the information it has and fills in what is missing. And it does this with sound too. Imagine someone speaking while a loud noise happens at exactly the same moment. You miss part of the sentence, but somehow you still understand what they meant. Your brain uses the words before the missing section, the words afterward, and the situation itself to reconstruct what probably happened. You are not hearing every sound. Your brain is filling the gap. This is why context is so powerful. If someone says, "Please close the," your brain already has expectations about what comes next: door, window, gate. The possible answers are limited by the situation. Your brain does not need complete information because it has learned how language normally works. The same thing happens when you read. If a word is partly covered, you can often understand it anyway. Your brain does not need every letter. It recognizes the general pattern and uses the surrounding sentence to predict the missing information. This is useful. But it can also create mistakes. Imagine you are in a dark room and see a strange shape in the corner. You cannot see enough detail to identify it. Your brain still has to decide what it might be. If you are relaxed, you may assume it is a piece of furniture. If you are already frightened, you might see a person. The object did not change. The information was incomplete. Your brain supplied the rest using your expectations. This is why fear can make ordinary things look threatening. Your brain is not waiting for perfect evidence. It is trying to reach a useful conclusion quickly. And sometimes that conclusion is wrong. You can also see this in memory. When you remember an event from years ago, you probably remember important moments, but you do not remember every second. You do not remember every sound, every movement, every expression, or every tiny detail. Your brain reconstructs the experience from the pieces that remain. That means a memory can feel complete even when parts of it are missing. You may remember where someone was standing without remembering exactly when they moved there. You may remember what someone said without remembering the exact words. You may remember the feeling of an event more strongly than the details surrounding it. Your brain creates a coherent version from incomplete information. And because the finished version feels natural, you may never realize which parts were actually observed and which parts were reconstructed. This is one reason people can be extremely confident about memories that contain errors. The brain does not usually show you a warning sign saying, "This detail is uncertain." It simply gives you the completed experience. The same principle explains why you can recognize familiar objects from unusual angles. A chair viewed from behind does not look exactly like a chair viewed from the front. But your brain knows what a chair is. It has stored a flexible pattern instead of one perfect image, so it fills in the missing information and identifies the object. Your brain is constantly asking one basic question. Given everything I know, what is probably here? That question happens so quickly that you experience the answer as reality. You see a person, you hear a sentence, you remember an event, you recognize an object. It all feels complete, but underneath that smooth experience is a constant process of prediction and reconstruction. Your brain is taking fragments and building a whole. Most of the time, that is exactly what you need. The world is too complicated to provide perfect information at every moment. Objects will always be hidden. Sounds will always be interrupted. Memories will always be incomplete. Your senses will always miss something. So your brain fills the gaps. It predicts what should be there. It uses context. It uses experience. It uses memory. And when all those clues point in the same direction, the guess becomes almost impossible to distinguish from something you actually saw or heard. That is the strange part. You do not experience the missing details as missing. You experience them as if they were always there. Your brain does not simply show you what information survived. It quietly completes the picture, and most of the time, you never notice what it added. Think about closing your eyes and touching your nose. You probably do it without hesitation. You do not need a mirror. You do not need to look at your hand. Somehow, your brain already knows where your nose is, where your hand is, and how far your arm needs to move. But how? Your eyes are closed. You are not looking at your body. Yet you still know where everything is. That is because your brain is constantly building an internal map of your body. This ability is called proprioception. It allows you to know where your body parts are, how they are moving, and how they are positioned without needing to see them. Your muscles, joints, and tendons constantly send information to your brain. They tell your brain things like how much your muscles are stretching, what angle your joints are at, and how your body is moving through space. Your brain combines all of that information into a feeling of where you are. That is why you can walk without staring at your feet. You can scratch your back without seeing your hand. You can climb stairs while looking ahead. You can type without watching every finger. Your brain already knows where your body is supposed to be, and this system is working every second you are awake. Imagine sitting in a chair and lifting your foot slightly off the ground. You know where your foot is. You can feel that it is raised. You can even move your toes and know they are moving without seeing them. That knowledge feels automatic because your brain is constantly receiving information from inside your body. But here is where things get strange. Your sense of where your body is can sometimes be fooled. Your brain does not have a perfect map. It has an estimate, and that estimate can change depending on the signals it receives. You can see this in the famous rubber hand illusion. A person places one hand out of sight while a fake rubber hand is positioned where their real hand would normally be. When both the real hidden hand and the fake hand are touched in a synchronized way, the brain can begin to treat the fake hand as if it belongs to the person. That sounds ridiculous. You know the rubber hand is not your real hand, but your brain is receiving matching visual and touch information. The eyes see the fake hand being touched. The skin feels touch at the same time. The brain tries to make those signals fit together, and for a moment, the boundary between your body and the object can become surprisingly flexible. This tells us something important. Your feeling of having a body is not created by one single sense. Your brain combines vision, touch, movement, and internal signals to create the experience of being inside a body. That is why your body can sometimes feel strange when those signals disagree. Imagine looking at your hand while moving it. Everything matches. You see the hand move. You feel the movement. Your brain receives consistent information. Now imagine your hand is hidden. You move it without looking. Your brain still knows where it is because proprioception provides the information. But if something interferes with those signals, your sense of position can become less certain. This is why balance and body awareness become harder in complete darkness. Your eyes can no longer provide information about where your body is in relation to the environment. Your brain has to rely more heavily on signals from your muscles, joints, and inner ear. You may suddenly feel less stable. The floor has not changed. Your body has not necessarily become weaker. One important source of information has simply disappeared. Your brain is now working with fewer clues, and this body map is constantly being updated. When you learn a new physical skill, your brain becomes better at predicting how your body should move. A dancer learns exactly where their limbs need to be. An athlete can react without consciously calculating every movement. A musician can move their fingers across an instrument without staring at each one. Practice strengthens the relationship between movement and prediction. Eventually, the action feels automatic. You stop thinking about where every body part needs to go. Your brain handles much of the work in the background. This is why experienced people can sometimes perform complicated movements while their conscious attention is focused somewhere else. Their brain has built a strong internal model of the action, and that model includes the body. But there is another fascinating part. Your brain does not only track where your body is, it also tracks what belongs to your body. Your hand feels like yours. Your foot feels like yours. Your face feels like yours. That sense of ownership is so natural that you almost never question it. But experiments like the rubber hand illusion show that the brain can temporarily shift that sense of ownership when sensory information strongly suggests that something else belongs to you. Your brain is constantly asking which signals belong to your body and which belong to the outside world. Most of the time, the answer is obvious, but the fact that the answer can be manipulated reveals how constructed the experience really is. You do not directly feel a perfect map of your physical body. Your brain creates a working model from countless signals. It tracks your position. It predicts your movements. It combines touch with vision. It monitors your muscles and joints. And it updates the whole model every moment. That is why you can reach for something without looking at your hand. Why you can walk through a room without staring at your feet. Why you can feel where your body ends and the outside world begins. You experience your body as something stable and obvious. But underneath that feeling is a constantly updated prediction. Your brain is always calculating where you are, how you are moving, and which sensations belong to you. You do not have to think about it. You simply feel like you are inside your body, and that feeling is something your brain is continuously creating. Touch feels like one of the most reliable things you have. If someone taps your shoulder, you know exactly where they touched you. If you step on something sharp, you know where the pain is coming from. If your phone vibrates in your pocket, you immediately know which part of your body felt it. But your brain does not actually receive a little message saying, "This exact spot was touched." It receives signals. Then it has to figure out where those signals came from. And sometimes it gets the location wrong. Imagine someone touches both of your hands at the same time while your hands are positioned differently. Your brain has to combine information from both sides of your body and determine exactly what happened. Usually, it does this incredibly well. But when the signals become confusing, your sense of location can become surprisingly inaccurate. One reason is that your brain does not process touch in isolation. It combines touch with vision, body position, movement, and expectation. If you see someone touch your arm, at the same moment you feel a touch there. The signals agree. Your brain becomes very confident about where the touch happened. But if the visual information and touch information disagree, your brain has to decide which explanation makes the most sense. And sometimes, the brain chooses incorrectly. You can see this in experiments involving crossed hands. When people cross their hands and receive touches on both hands at the same time, it can become harder to identify which hand was touched first. The physical touch is simple. The problem is the brain's map of the body. Your brain normally expects your left hand to be on one side and your right hand to be on the other. Cross them, and that expectation becomes less useful. The signals are still arriving, but the brain has to work harder to place them correctly. This reveals something strange about touch. Your body does not come with a perfectly accurate internal coordinate system. Your brain has learned a model of your body and uses that model to interpret incoming sensations. Most of the time, the model works so well that you never think about it. You just feel where things are happening. But the moment the signals become confusing, you can notice the machinery underneath. Something similar happens when you touch two nearby points on your skin. Some areas of your body are extremely sensitive. Your fingertips can distinguish very small differences between two touches. Other areas are much less sensitive. If someone touches your back with two nearby points, you may experience them as one touch. Your brain is receiving information from the skin, but the resolution of that information is different across the body. Your brain has effectively built a detailed map of some regions and a much rougher map of others. That is why your fingertips are so good at identifying tiny textures. They contain a high density of touch receptors and are especially important for interacting with the world. Your back does not need the same level of precision. Your brain does not need to know the exact location of every tiny touch across every square centimeter of skin. It needs enough information to guide useful behavior. And there is another strange effect. Sometimes you can feel a touch even when the source is not where you think it is. A vibration in a pocket can feel like your phone is buzzing even when it is not. A small movement of clothing can feel like something touched your skin. A sensation in one area can be interpreted differently depending on what you expect. Your brain is constantly trying to explain sensations. If you expect your phone to vibrate, a small sensation in your pocket may become phone vibration. If you expect someone to touch your shoulder, a tiny movement of clothing can briefly feel like a touch. The physical signal may be weak or ambiguous. Your brain supplies the interpretation, and this is not a flaw. It is the same prediction system that makes perception possible. Your senses are constantly sending incomplete information. Your brain needs to turn that information into something useful quickly. So it combines what you feel with what you already know. Most of the time, that produces an accurate experience. But when the signals are unusual, your brain can make a mistake. This is also why phantom sensations can happen after an amputation. Some people can continue to feel sensations coming from a limb that is no longer physically present. The experience can be incredibly vivid. The brain still contains a representation of that body part, even though the physical limb is gone. The important lesson is not that the brain is simply imagining things. It is that your experience of touch depends on a network of brain activity, not just on the skin itself. Your brain has learned what your body feels like. It has built maps for different body regions. It predicts where sensations should occur, and it uses incoming signals to update those predictions. When everything agrees, touch feels perfectly located. When the signals conflict, the brain has to make a best guess, and sometimes that guess is wrong. So when you feel a touch, it may seem obvious that your body simply reported exactly what happened. But underneath that simple feeling is something much more complicated. Your skin detected a signal. Your nervous system carried it. Your brain interpreted it. And then your mind experienced the final result as a specific touch happening in a specific place. You do not feel the calculation. You only feel the answer. And sometimes, your brain can be wrong about where that answer belongs. Look at an object in front of you and try to notice exactly what your eyes are doing. It feels like they are simply pointing at the world and showing you what is there. But your eyes are constantly moving. They jump from one detail to another. They blink. They adjust to brightness. They change focus. And somehow, despite all of this movement, the world feels completely stable. That stability is something your brain creates. Your eyes do not give you a perfect picture of reality. They give your brain changing signals, and your brain turns those signals into the steady world you experience. Think about looking at someone's face. Your eyes are not taking in the entire face with equal detail. You focus on particular areas, maybe the eyes, then the mouth, then another feature. Your gaze jumps around extremely quickly, but you do not experience the world as a series of blurry snapshots. Your brain smooths everything together. It hides the gaps. It keeps the important information stable. This is one reason you rarely notice how often your eyes move. If you became consciously aware of every tiny movement your eyes made, everyday vision would feel completely different. Instead, your brain creates the experience of a continuous scene. And this becomes obvious when you look at optical illusions. You can stare directly at something and still perceive movement, depth, size, or color that is not physically there. The image reaches your eyes, but the experience is created by your brain. Your eyes are collecting light. Your brain is interpreting it. That distinction matters. Imagine looking at two identical objects placed in different parts of a room. One might look larger because of the surrounding objects. The physical size is the same, but your brain uses context to estimate size. If one object appears farther away, your brain may interpret its smaller image as distance rather than actual size. This is called size constancy. Your brain has learned that familiar objects usually keep their physical size, so when their image changes, it often assumes the object moved instead of assuming the object itself changed. That is useful, but it also means your perception can be fooled. Your brain is making assumptions because assumptions usually work. The same thing happens with color. You might think an object has a fixed color, but the amount and type of light around it can completely change the signals reaching your eyes. A white shirt can appear warm under one light and cool under another. Yet you still experience it as white. Your brain is correcting for the lighting conditions. It is trying to determine the object's actual color rather than simply reporting the raw light entering your eyes. Most of the time, that correction is helpful. But when the lighting is unusual, the brain can make the wrong assumption. That is why some color illusions can make the same image appear completely different to different people. The eyes receive information. The brain decides what that information probably means, and your expectations influence the decision. This happens with faces too. If you expect to see someone you know in a crowd, your brain becomes more sensitive to familiar facial patterns. You may think you spotted them. Then you look again. It was someone else. Your brain was not malfunctioning. It was using expectation to make perception faster. The problem is that speed and accuracy are not always the same thing. Your brain has to process an enormous amount of information every second. It cannot carefully analyze everything from scratch, so it uses shortcuts. It recognizes patterns. It predicts what should be there. It ignores information that seems unimportant. It fills in missing details. It corrects for lighting. It estimates distance. It stabilizes the scene while your eyes move. All of this happens before you become consciously aware of it. And that is why your visual experience feels so effortless. You do not see the raw data. You see the interpretation. This becomes especially obvious when something unexpected happens. Walk into a familiar room and move one object. You might instantly feel that something is different without knowing what changed. Your brain has a stored expectation of the room. The current image does not match it. So your attention increases. You start searching for the difference. Again, your eyes are providing information. Your brain is comparing that information with what it predicted. This predictive process is happening constantly. Even when you think you are simply looking at something, your brain is asking what should be here, what is important, how far away is it, what object is this, and what is likely to happen next. You experience the final answer as seeing. That is why your eyes can appear to lie. The eyes themselves are not trying to deceive you. They are sensors. The real trick happens after the information enters your nervous system. Your brain has to transform light into a meaningful world. And sometimes, the most useful interpretation is not the most physically accurate one. Your brain cares about creating a stable, useful experience quickly. It would rather give you a clear answer that is slightly wrong than leave you with a confusing collection of raw signals. So when an illusion fools you, it is not simply because your eyes failed. It is because your brain did exactly what it normally does. It interpreted, it predicted, it filled gaps, it used context, and it produced a version of reality that made sense. Your eyes collect the evidence. Your brain decides what the evidence means, and the world you experience is the result. Imagine sitting somewhere crowded while several people are talking at once. At first, it sounds like one giant wall of noise. Then someone says your name. Suddenly, you hear it. Not only that, you can usually understand the rest of the sentence they are saying. But here is the strange part. The noise did not disappear. Your brain simply decided which sounds mattered. Your ears were receiving everything at the same time. Voices, music, movement, traffic, background sounds. Your brain had to separate all of that information and figure out what could be meaningful. And sometimes it can turn sounds that are barely understandable into words. This happens because your brain does not listen to every sound as if it exists by itself. It uses context. Imagine someone says, "I left the keys on the..." Before they finish, your brain is already predicting possible words: table, desk, counter. You are not consciously listing every possibility. Your brain has learned how language works, so it automatically narrows down what is likely to come next. That prediction makes speech easier to understand, especially when the sound itself is unclear. Now imagine someone speaking while a loud noise happens at exactly the moment they say one word. You might not receive the full sound, but you can still understand the sentence. Your brain uses the information around the missing sound to reconstruct what probably happened. This is one reason you can understand conversations in noisy environments. Your brain is not simply extracting words from sound. It is predicting which words make sense. And sometimes that prediction becomes so strong that you can almost hear a word that was never clearly spoken. Think about listening to a song with unclear lyrics. You hear a line and cannot understand it. Then someone tells you the words. You listen again. Suddenly, the lyric sounds obvious. The recording did not change. Your ears received the same sound. But your brain now had a prediction. And that prediction changed how the sound was interpreted. This reveals something important about hearing. The sounds reaching your ears are only part of the experience. Your brain adds meaning. It uses previous knowledge. It uses grammar. It uses context. It uses expectations. It even uses what you think you are supposed to hear. That is why the same unclear sound can be interpreted differently depending on what you expect. Imagine hearing someone speak from another room. You cannot make out the sentence. Someone tells you the person is talking about dinner. Suddenly, certain sounds start resembling words related to food. Your brain is using the new context to organize ambiguous information. This is not unusual. It happens constantly. Your brain is trying to turn incomplete signals into something useful. And this ability can create some fascinating mistakes. Have you ever thought you heard someone say your name when nobody actually did? Maybe someone in another room said something that sounded similar. Your brain knows your name is important. So when the sound is unclear, it may give that interpretation extra attention. You suddenly turn around. Nobody called you. The sound was real. The meaning was wrong. Your brain made the best guess it could. This is also why speech can become easier to understand when you can see the speaker's face. Your eyes provide additional information. You can see their mouth moving. You can see when they pause. You can see their facial expression. Your brain combines the visual information with the sound. Now the auditory signal does not have to carry all the information by itself. Your brain has more clues, and more clues usually mean better predictions. This becomes extremely important when the environment is noisy. Your brain can use the person's face and mouth movements to help determine which sounds belong to their speech. You are not consciously combining two separate streams of information. Your brain does it automatically. That is why looking directly at someone can make them easier to understand in a crowded place. Your brain is constantly solving the same basic problem. What sound am I receiving? And what does it probably mean? Sometimes the answer is obvious. Sometimes it is uncertain. When it is uncertain, your brain leans more heavily on context. If you are at a restaurant, certain words become more likely. If you are at work, different words become likely. If someone asks you a question, your brain expects a particular type of answer. The situation itself becomes part of what you hear. And this is why speech can feel incredibly clear, even when the actual sound is incomplete. Your brain is filling in the missing pieces so smoothly that you never notice the reconstruction. You simply experience a sentence. You experience a voice. You experience meaning. But underneath that experience, your brain is constantly predicting. It is estimating which sounds belong together. It is separating one voice from another. It is using language to fill gaps. It is comparing incoming sounds with patterns it already knows. And when all of those clues point in the same direction, a messy collection of sound becomes something meaningful. Words, sentences, ideas. You might think you hear language because the sound itself contains the meaning. But the sound is only the starting point. Your brain turns patterns of noise into something you understand. And sometimes, when the information is incomplete, your brain does not wait for the missing pieces. It invents the most likely ones. That is why you can hear words inside noise. Your ears collect the sounds. Your brain finds the pattern. And then it gives you a voice. How your brain chooses reality. Every second, your brain is surrounded by more information than you could ever consciously process. Sounds are coming from different directions. Light is entering your eyes. Your body is sending signals about temperature, pressure, movement, and balance. Yet somehow you experience one simple thing: reality. But your brain cannot process everything. So it has to choose. It decides what deserves your attention, what can be ignored, what something probably means, and what version of the world makes the most sense. That means the reality you experience is not simply everything happening around you. It is the version your brain selects. Imagine walking through a crowded street. Hundreds of people are around you. Cars are moving. Signs are everywhere. Conversations overlap. Music is playing nearby. You cannot consciously process every face, every sound, and every movement. Your brain filters most of it out. Then someone says your name. Suddenly, that voice becomes important. Your attention turns toward it. The rest of the street does not disappear. Your brain simply changes what matters. This filtering happens constantly. You might walk into a room and immediately notice a strange smell. Someone else might notice the temperature. Another person might notice a sound. You are all standing in the same room, but you are not experiencing exactly the same reality. Your brains are selecting different information, and your expectations influence those selections. If you are looking for your keys, your brain becomes sensitive to shapes and locations where your keys might be. If you are looking for someone in a crowd, faces become especially important. If you are worried about something, your attention becomes more sensitive to information connected to that concern. Your brain is constantly asking what matters right now, and that question changes what you notice. But it goes even deeper. Your brain does not simply filter information, it interprets it. Imagine seeing someone across the street raise their hand. You might think they are waving at you. Someone else might think they are stretching. Another person might think they are trying to stop a car. The same movement reaches all three brains. The meaning can be completely different. Your brain uses context and previous experience to decide what the movement probably means. This is why expectations are so powerful. If you expect danger, a strange sound may feel threatening. If you expect someone to be friendly, a neutral expression may seem welcoming. Your predictions become part of perception. Think about walking into a dark room. You see a shape near the wall. You do not have enough information to identify it. Your brain has to make a prediction. If you are calm, you might assume it is a chair. If you are frightened, you might think it is a person. The visual information is incomplete. Your emotional state helps determine which explanation becomes most convincing. Your brain is not waiting for absolute certainty. It needs to act quickly. So it constantly makes predictions and compares them with incoming information. When the prediction matches, everything feels normal. When something does not match, your attention increases. You suddenly notice the difference. This is why a familiar room can feel strange when one small object has been moved. Your brain already has a model of the room. The current information does not perfectly match that model. Something feels wrong before you can explain why. Your brain detected the mismatch. And this prediction system is not limited to vision. It affects hearing, touch, time, memory, and even your sense of your own body. When you hear an unclear sentence, your brain predicts the missing words. When you remember an old event, your brain reconstructs missing details. When you feel a touch, your brain determines where that sensation probably came from. When you experience time passing, your brain decides how much attention to give each moment. You are constantly receiving fragments. Your brain turns those fragments into a coherent experience. That is why reality feels complete. You do not experience the missing information. You experience the finished interpretation, and most of the time, this system works incredibly well. If your brain had to consciously analyze every detail of every moment, you could not function. Filtering and prediction allow you to move through the world effortlessly. But there is a cost. The same system that helps you understand reality can distort it. You can miss something obvious because your attention was focused elsewhere. You can hear words that were never clearly spoken. You can see patterns that are not actually there. You can remember details differently from how they happened. You can feel that time moved quickly even though the clock never changed speed. Your brain is not giving you a perfect copy of reality. It is giving you a useful model. And usefulness is not always the same thing as accuracy. That may be the strangest part. You rarely experience the process. You simply feel like you are seeing the world exactly as it is. But underneath all of that is a brain constantly filtering, predicting, comparing, correcting, and filling in information. The world gives your brain signals. Your brain turns those signals into an experience. So, when you look around and feel like you are simply observing reality, remember what is actually happening. Your brain is deciding what reality should look like to you. It is choosing what to notice, choosing what to ignore, choosing what something means, choosing what is likely to happen next. And then it gives you the final result so smoothly that you never notice the choices being made. You do not experience reality exactly as it arrives. You experience the version your brain believes makes the most sense. The reality you never notice, most of reality is happening without you noticing it. Right now, your eyes are taking in countless details. Your ears are receiving sounds. Your body is constantly sending signals about pressure, temperature, balance, and movement. But you are not consciously experiencing all of it. Your brain is filtering, and the strange part is that you usually never notice what gets removed. Think about your own face. You see other people's faces constantly, but you almost never notice your own nose sitting in the middle of your vision. It is there. You can see it if you focus on it. But most of the time, your brain simply removes it from your conscious experience. It is not useful enough to keep your attention. The same thing happens with the constant feeling of your clothes against your skin. When you first put on a shirt, you notice the fabric. A few minutes later, you barely feel it. The physical sensation did not disappear. Your brain decided it was no longer important. This is called sensory adaptation. Your nervous system is constantly receiving information, but your brain becomes less responsive to signals that remain unchanged. That is why a strong smell can seem intense when you first enter a room and then gradually disappear. The smell is still there. Your brain simply stops treating it as new information. This filtering is essential. Imagine consciously noticing every sound around you. The refrigerator humming, air moving through a vent, your heartbeat, your breathing, clothing rubbing against your skin, distant traffic, every tiny movement outside. You would be overwhelmed almost immediately, so your brain creates a hierarchy. Some information gets attention, some information stays in the background, and some information barely reaches conscious awareness at all. This is why you can become completely absorbed in a conversation and suddenly realize you have been ignoring everything happening around you. Your brain did not stop receiving the other information. It simply gave one stream priority. And attention can change what seems real. Imagine reading a book in a crowded room. People are talking, music is playing, chairs are moving. Someone might even be walking directly past you. But if you are deeply focused on the page, most of that activity disappears from your awareness. Then someone says your name. Instantly, your attention shifts. The room comes rushing back. Nothing suddenly appeared. Your brain simply changed the filter. This is also why you can miss something that is directly in front of you. You might assume that if your eyes are looking at an object, you must consciously see it. But that is not true. Your brain decides what information deserves attention. If you are focused on counting something else, an unexpected object can sometimes appear right in front of you without becoming consciously noticed. This is known as inattentional blindness. It shows how different seeing can be from noticing. Your eyes can receive information that your conscious mind never experiences. And this happens constantly. You do not notice every person in a crowd. You do not remember every sound you heard today. You do not consciously track every movement your body made. You do not notice every object you passed while walking outside. Your brain is constantly throwing information away, but it does not feel like anything is missing. That is the clever part. Your brain does not show you an empty space where the ignored information should have been. It simply gives you the feeling that you experienced the environment normally. This creates a strange illusion. You feel like you see everything around you, but you actually see a highly edited version. Your attention decides what becomes important. Your expectations influence what you search for. Your memories influence what you recognize. Your emotions influence what feels threatening or safe. And your brain combines all of this into one seamless experience. Think about walking through your own home. You probably do not consciously inspect every wall, every object, every piece of furniture. You know the environment so well that your brain can process it almost automatically. But move one familiar object, and you might immediately sense that something is different. Your brain has been keeping a rough model of the environment in the background. You were not consciously studying the room. Your brain was doing it for you. That is why familiar places can feel strange when something changes. Your conscious mind may not know what changed. Your brain does. And this is happening beyond vision. Your brain predicts sounds. It predicts touch. It predicts movement. It predicts what people are likely to say. It predicts what should happen next. When reality matches those predictions, you barely notice. When reality breaks them, your attention suddenly wakes up. That is why a sudden silence can feel louder than constant noise. It violates an expectation. That is why an unexpected touch can make your whole body react. Your brain was not prepared for it. And that is why a familiar environment can suddenly feel completely different. Something changed in the pattern. Most of the time, you are not experiencing reality as a complete collection of everything happening around you. You are experiencing what your brain considers relevant. The rest becomes background, and some of it disappears completely from conscious awareness. That does not mean your brain is hiding reality from you deliberately. It means your brain has to protect you from information overload. There is simply too much happening for consciousness to handle everything. So your brain edits, it filters, it predicts, it ignores, it highlights. And then it gives you the final experience. You look around and think you are seeing the world. But what you are actually seeing is the version your brain decided was worth noticing. The strangest part is not that your brain ignores so much. It is that you rarely realize anything was missing. Your brain builds now. Think about this exact moment. You feel like you are experiencing it directly. You are reading these words right now. You can hear sounds around you. You can feel your body sitting or standing. It feels immediate. It feels like you are experiencing the present exactly as it happens. But your brain cannot actually experience reality at the exact moment it occurs. There is always a tiny delay. Light has to reach your eyes. Sound has to travel to your ears. Signals have to move through your nervous system. Your brain has to process all of that information. And somehow, after all those steps, you experience something that feels like one unified moment. Now, your brain builds that now. Imagine watching someone clap their hands. You see their hands move together. You hear the sound of the clap. You experience both things as happening at the same moment, but the visual and auditory signals do not reach your brain in exactly the same way or at exactly the same time. Your brain has to combine them. It creates a single experience that feels synchronized. This happens constantly. You see a person's lips moving. You hear their voice. You feel the movement of your own body. You notice something happening across the room. Your brain is continuously collecting signals arriving at slightly different times and organizing them into one coherent present. Without this process, the world might feel fragmented. You might see an event happen and hear it sound separately. You might feel your hand move slightly after seeing it move. Every sense could feel disconnected. Instead, your brain smooths everything together. It creates the feeling that you are living inside one continuous moment. And this is where time becomes strange. The present you experience is not a mathematical point. It is more like a small window. Your brain gathers information from a short period and combines it into one experience. That is why you can understand a sentence. A sentence does not arrive as one single sound. Words arrive one after another. Yet you experience the whole sentence as a meaningful unit. Your brain has to hold earlier information long enough to connect it with what comes next. It is constantly integrating moments together. This is also why you can understand movement. When you watch a person throw a ball, you do not experience thousands of separate positions. You experience one continuous action. Your brain links the changing visual information into movement. The world feels smooth because your brain is constantly connecting moments. And your brain does something else. It predicts what is about to happen. If you see someone reaching toward a glass, you can almost anticipate the movement. If someone starts a familiar sentence, you can often predict how it will end. If you are walking and see a step ahead, your brain predicts where your foot needs to land. This prediction helps your experience feel immediate. Your brain is not simply waiting for information. It is constantly moving slightly ahead of it. That is why the present can feel seamless, even though the signals reaching your brain are delayed. Your brain is combining what has just happened with what it expects to happen next. And when those predictions are accurate, you experience a stable now. But when something unexpected happens, you can suddenly notice the machinery. Imagine expecting someone to catch a ball. You watch the ball move toward their hand. Then they miss. For a brief moment, the event feels surprising because your prediction did not match reality. Your brain expected one outcome and received another. That mismatch captures your attention. The same thing happens when a familiar sound suddenly stops. You notice the silence. Or when someone speaks and the sound does not match their mouth movements. Something feels wrong. Your brain expected the signals to line up. They did not. This shows that your experience of the present depends partly on prediction. Your brain is constantly asking what should be happening right now. Then it compares that expectation with incoming information. Most of the time, the match is close enough that you never notice. But the present can also feel different depending on your emotional state. When you are bored, you may become intensely aware of each passing moment. When you are deeply focused, an hour can disappear. When something frightening happens, a few seconds can feel incredibly long. The clock remains consistent. Your brain's construction of the present changes. It decides how much attention to give each moment. It decides which information matters. It decides which events belong together. It decides what should happen next, and then it creates the feeling that you are experiencing reality in real time. You are not. You are experiencing a carefully assembled version of the recent past, combined with predictions about what is happening next. That sounds strange because the experience feels immediate, but your brain has to work this way. If it waited for every signal to arrive before constructing your experience, your reactions would always come too late. Instead, the brain predicts. It integrates. It adjusts. It corrects. And it keeps updating the model. The result is what you call the present. That moment you feel you are experiencing right now is not simply arriving from the outside world. Your brain is actively constructing it from delayed signals, recent memories, sensory information, and predictions. And because the process is so fast, you never notice the assembly. You simply feel like you are here, right now. But even that feeling of now is something your brain creates. You never experience reality directly. You have probably never stopped to question the most basic thing your brain does. You open your eyes, and you feel like you are looking directly at the world. You hear a sound, and it feels like the sound simply exists in your mind. You touch a table, and it feels like your brain is receiving the table exactly as it is. But that is not what is happening. You never experience reality directly. You experience what your brain builds from the information it receives. Think about light. An object does not arrive inside your mind. Light reflects from that object, enters your eyes, and creates patterns of activity in your nervous system. Your brain then interprets those signals as an object. You experience a table, but your brain never receives a table. It receives information. The same thing happens with sound. A speaker creates vibrations in the air. Those vibrations reach your ears. Your ears convert them into signals. Your brain processes those signals and gives you the experience of a voice, a song, or a noise. The sound you experience is not sitting inside the air waiting to be collected. Your brain constructs the experience from vibrations. This sounds like a small distinction. It is not. It means almost everything you experience is an interpretation. Take color. You might look at a red apple and think redness is simply a property sitting inside the apple. But what reaches your eyes is light with particular wavelengths. Your brain processes those signals and creates the experience of red. The apple does not contain a tiny red experience. Your brain creates that experience. And the same principle applies to touch. When you touch something hot, receptors in your skin detect changes. Signals travel through your nervous system. Your brain interprets those signals as heat and possibly pain. You do not experience the physical signals themselves. You experience the brain's interpretation of them. This is why the brain can sometimes be fooled. If perception were a perfect copy of reality, illusions should be impossible. But illusions happen because your brain is not simply recording. It is interpreting. It uses context. It uses memory. It uses expectations. It uses previous experience. Imagine seeing a shape in a dark room. There is not enough information to identify it clearly. Your brain still has to decide what it might be. If you are calm, you might think it is a chair. If you are already afraid, you might think it is a person. The physical information is ambiguous. Your brain supplies the most likely explanation. And suddenly, the same shape can feel completely different. The world did not necessarily change. Your interpretation changed. This happens with sound too. Someone speaks in a noisy room. You miss part of what they said. Your brain uses the surrounding words and the situation to fill in the missing information. You experience a complete sentence even though your ears did not receive every sound clearly. Your brain is constantly completing reality, and it does this because the information coming from your senses is incomplete. Your eyes have blind spots. Your ears receive overlapping sounds. Your skin provides different levels of sensitivity across the body. Your memories leave out enormous amounts of detail. Your brain has to work with fragments, so it builds a coherent experience from those fragments. That is why the world feels complete. You do not experience the gaps. You experience the finished result. This also explains why attention changes what you notice. Imagine walking through a busy street. There may be hundreds of people around you. You cannot consciously process every face. Your brain selects some information and ignores the rest. If someone suddenly calls your name, your attention shifts toward that sound. The voice becomes important. Everything else moves into the background. You did not suddenly start hearing the entire street. Your brain simply changed what it considered relevant. Your experience of reality is therefore partly shaped by what your brain chooses to prioritize, and your emotional state can change that experience too. When you are frightened, harmless sounds can seem threatening. When you are excited, time can seem to disappear. When you are exhausted, ordinary sensations can feel more intense. The outside world may remain relatively stable. Your brain's interpretation changes. This is why two people can experience the same event and describe it differently. They received similar information, but their brains brought different expectations, memories, emotions, and attention to the situation. Each person experienced a slightly different version of the event. That does not mean reality is imaginary. The outside world is still there. Objects still have physical properties. Events still happen, but your conscious experience is not a direct window into that world. It is a model that is usually extremely useful. Your brain does not need to reproduce every physical detail. It needs to create an experience that helps you survive, move, communicate, learn, and make decisions. That is why perception can be fast instead of perfect. Your brain is constantly predicting what is happening. Then it compares those predictions with incoming information. If the prediction is close, the world feels normal. If the prediction fails, you notice something strange. This process is happening every moment you are awake. You see, you hear, you touch, you remember, you react. And underneath all of it, your brain is constructing an experience from signals. You never see reality in its raw form. You never hear reality exactly as it exists outside your nervous system. You never feel an object exactly as the object is. You experience what your brain believes those signals mean. And the most unsettling part is that this process is so smooth that you never feel like anything is being constructed. You simply look around and think, this is the world. But what you are actually experiencing is your brain's best interpretation of the world. Reality exists outside you. Your experience of reality is built inside you.